Well, good afternoon. I'm going to call this meeting back to order at just past 1:30, and we'll start with a roll call of committee. Councillor Jans, are you online? Okay, I'm not sure that he is. Councillor Tang, I see.
Good afternoon.
Councillor Wright. And Mayor Sohi, so
Here.
that's enough to get us started. So we're returning, just so everybody knows, we're back on item 6.1 and continuing with questions of committee and other councillors. Oh, I guess we're also joined by the majority of council, so in the interest of brevity, I'm not going to list everybody's name. You all know who you are. You all know you're here. Mr. Smythe, just a few questions. We've been talking a little bit about budget and about the context of this conversation, you know, and perhaps not having the full context of a full budget discussion, or at least a full discussion around the various pieces, very broadly stated, around community safety and well-being, and all of the various programs and partners and the like that are involved in this work. I think I understood you to say that in Q1 2022, there'd be a conversation about the 11 million that is essentially unassigned in our budget, our 2022 budget. Did I understand that correctly or not?
That will be part of the conversation.
Okay.
It's really it will be woven into that information that will be in front of council. It'll be also addressing the overall strategy around community safety, well-being, and anti-racism. So those two pieces will be in front of council in that first quarter, and included in that will be where to from here with the $11 million.
So we heard a little bit of tension, you know, small t tension around the $11 million and perhaps the need for some urgency to allocate that money and move forward with a few of the steps, you know, again, in the broad spectrum of community safety and well-being. So is there opportunity to have some of that conversation at council during our budget conversation? Can we advance administration's advice and input on those matters?
Maybe I'll let our CFO weigh in on that, Councillor or Mr. Chair.
Okay. Stacey?
So as part of budget, you could choose to have those conversations. Currently, this isn't in the budget as that is being proposed. So to fund anything, you would have to make a motion and debate that motion as part of the budget deliberations.
But the 11 million is still in our overall $3.2 billion budget. It's just unallocated at this point.
That's correct.
Okay. So I guess then back to you, Mr. Smythe and Ms. Ford, would there be an opportunity for you to provide some, a report, some input, some advice, sometime in the next few weeks, really, that would allow council to maybe make some decisions around some allocation of some of that money?
Councillor, I guess in my estimation, it would be premature to do that. We really do need to, the whole notion of co-creation with community is a step we believe we need to take, and that we really want to join forces with mutual aid groups, anti-racism organizations, really to potentially confirm what we think is the right thing to do, or put on the table in front of council in that first quarter other ideas that emerge from community.
We may run the risk of allocating money to a particular strategy that might not, once we have the conversation, be the best strategy.
That is our worry. That's what's in my head.
So we have a bit of a yin and a yang thing. I don't know how else to put it. We're being asked sort of to assign some dollars, albeit 2021 dollars, on a one-time basis with some urgency to these groups, and there's some pieces of the work here that do seem to have some urgency. But on the other hand, your advice is that we shouldn't prematurely allocate some of that $11 million during budget, that we need to have the more fulsome conversations. So
that characterizes it, I think, quite well. And and certainly the decisions around the $11 million is ongoing and base funding. So those are very significant decisions. The one-time funding potentially that we are addressing today is is very short-term through ARAC, that gets the money out the door, as I said earlier.
Okay, so kind of reading between the lines there, then, you're suggesting that we need a more fulsome discussion because those will be ongoing spending decisions. They won't be one-time spending decisions. They'll be ongoing and continuous programming.
That's accurate, yes.
I see, okay. Okay, that's all my questions. I'll move to Councillor Rice on the first round, and we do have a few on the second round. And again, just from an agenda management perspective, I'm wondering if we requisition this to council where there will be quite a lot of time to talk about a lot of budget things. I'll just leave that thought with you. Councillor Rice.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Rice, and good afternoon, everyone. As continue the discussion from morning, I heard many of my colleagues, councillors, and trustees are concerned regarding this $1.174 million allocation. And then I personally do believe it's so important and build a safe and healthy city and for all of us. And I deeply care about our community safety and well-being as well. The concern I have, I believe, for any funding, we at the city level we spend it, and specifically right now, and how we reflect that funding allocation to our basic principle about priority-based budgeting process, and then what is our city's position at this moment, and to look at this initiatives and this funding needed, and to reflect that principle. And so I would like to get some answer on that. That is my first question.
Certainly, Council, there is certainly part of priority-based budgeting that one of the lines of business that's part of that work obviously is in this sector, social development, and it gets inputted into that whole process, and so the council can sort of see where it is relative to many our 73 lines of business in our corporation. And certainly do recognize this on the surface does appear like it's a bit of a unique recommendation outside of that context. But as finance and other parts of our corporation bring forward the priority-based budgeting information, it won't be as granular as we've been talking this morning, but it will this general line of business will be part of that information, and then council will make decisions based on that. But in my head, a little bit of the expanding on the importance of this is that, you know, the importance of making decisions in the short term to get some work going in community is what's important here. Recognizing fully the strategy piece, the priority piece is not in front of committee today.
So then my concern is, and because this is ongoing spending, and then we have the promise and to ensure all Edmontonians receive that accountability piece, and specifically for every dollar we spend it. And so from that perspective, so I look at this process, I read all this 7, 6, 8 pages report. I didn't say there is a clear metrics in place how those initiatives will be delivered, and how this funding allocation process will be at the level, and for us to look at measurable outcome. And so that piece is not clear to me. And can you provide more information on that? And if we're going to allocate this over $1 billion, this is a huge amount, and how we can measure the outcome, the impact, the results, and from that perspective.
Thank you, Councillor. It's Jackie Ford here. So I just want to get some clarity on a question. You're looking at the allocation to ARAC for the ongoing grants, that is it 1.75 million, or are you talking about the entire process?
Oh, I'm talking about the entire process. I just use that $1.174 billion as an example, because this is not the small amount, it's a big amount. Right.
So the money that the Anti-Racism Advisory Committee, those grants that would go out would go under the evaluation process like the other grants that go out through the door. And the two specific projects that were mentioned in this report, again, would also, we would ask them for an evaluation when it's over. One in particular is a pilot project, so we'll be looking at that to see how well it worked and what we could use going forward in case it needs to be expanded to other parts of the community. But those will be evaluated.
Do we have that evaluation like framework in place already before we allocate those fundings?
They typically happen when a project would come in and say, apply for money. They would, in their application, would say what they're looking to achieve with the money, what outcomes they're looking for. So that is also part of not just before the money is allocated, it goes right into the granting process.
So my questions, I would like to clarify my question again.
Sorry, Councillor Rice, I'm sorry, your time is up.
Okay, so I will go to the next one.
Right, thank you. So starting the second round then, Councillor Stevenson. Oh, yes, Councillor Stevenson, thank you.
Thank you. So just following from Councillor or the Chair's questions, so we could, as part of the fall supplementary operating budget adjustment, allocate some of the 11 million from 2022 to specific community safety initiatives?
You could do that.
And I hear absolutely the caution of, wanting to, again, make this a collaborative process with community. Are we able to make those one-time contributions rather than ongoing, as was discussed previously?
Yes, you can make motions that would fund either on a one-time basis or on an ongoing basis.
Okay, great. Thanks very much. I think for me that's probably the right mechanism and the right avenue to discuss these opportunities. So thank you very much for providing that clarity.
Thank you. Councillor Hamilton.
Sorry, I believe I'm left on from before. I don't have any questions now. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Wright.
Okay, just some more clarification on the budget for it. So our budget adjustment discussion is on 2022 dollars, right?
That's correct.
Okay, so this money that's being requested is from 2021 dollars. If we don't use it now, do we lose it?
No, so the money that is currently held aside was held aside for a specific purpose. It will not be used until you allocate it to be used for such purpose.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Okay. I'm going to go to Mayor Sohi because I think he's trying to speak. And it keeps
I thought it was on the list, but I thought it was taken off the list for some reason, but that's okay. Just to focus on the 2021 5.5 million, 3.75 million has been allocated one-time basis to various organizations, right?
That's a community investment operating grant?
Yes.
Yes.
As part of that, right? And the recommendation of 1.174 million going to the Anti-Racism Advisory Committee, that has been informed by discussions with the community. It's not recommendations just coming from you. There has been some discussions.
We have discussed it with the chair of ARAC.
Yeah.
So she is, Shalini is supportive of doing that, recognizing that it is one-time money.
Yeah, and it will fill that immediate need until we figure out the long-term strategy for the $11 million in consultation with, or based on the spirit of the 14 recommendations from the task force.
That's correct, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, right. So that's why you're recommending one-time funding, because you haven't had that thorough discussions with the.
And sort of one of the ideas that I went over in one of the slides is that perhaps the ongoing grant funding from ARAC should be increased from the existing $300,000 that they have. But again, just a very initial idea, potentially, in terms of having them being able to move the dial in terms of their mandate.
Yeah, it's kind of filling that interim gap. And Councillor Stevenson's question, we can always allocate one-time funding from sources that are available to us, in this case, the $11 million for 2022. But
That's correct.
Yeah, but there's also other option, like you can always allocate funding during the budget, but put it in abeyance until the consultation has taken place with the wider community, and those allocations are considered that.
That's correct, Mr. Mayor.
So that is another process that is available if you want. I mean, you can always allocate one time, right, or permanently, or you put in abeyance, then do the consultation. So there's various options available for us to look at $11 million to fill that, some of the needs that council members are identifying.
The other point I'd just like to emphasize with committee is that as we work on the engagement pieces, we don't want to focus just on the $11 million.
Yes.
There is a bigger strategy here.
Yes.
That, just to be quite frank about it, may be significantly more than 11.
Yeah.
So,
That's-
but that's to be determined.
Yeah,
That's
that was,
just
I was
one
coming,
piece.
Council Zan's question about around, like, just taking this money and putting into something else, like taking and this proposed money for anti-racism work, putting somewhere else, maybe might be an interim solution, but we have to have that holistic discussion during the budget,
Correct again.
or
Mr.
be beyond the budget.
Yes.
I just want to share some observations around the conversation in a way, the kind of language that we use. For example, we never reduced police budget. We always added money to the police budget. So this argument, this money has been taken away from police to fund this, we never reduced police budget in 2021. Council still added more money to police budget.
I think Stacey should
So if
clarify
I can
that.
just clarify, so for the 2019 to 2022 cycle, that's correct, police budget was increased in accordance with the funding formula each of those years. So from 2019 to 2020, police budget increased 16.2 million. From 2021 to 22, 16.8 million. And 2022 to 2023, 17.5.
Yeah.
That was what was approved when the police budget was approved in the initial four-year cycle.
Yeah.
What was done was to remove 5 million in 2021 and another 5.5 million in 2022 for a combined 11. So it reduced the approved budget, but year over year, they still experience increases.
Yeah, because it's based on the formula, which is very generous formula compared to any other department that gets funding from the city.
No other departments are
It has
funded by
any
formula.
formula, right? So I think it's very important for us to communicate in a way that we don't leave the impression that we're taking money away from police to fund other programs when it's actually, it's a money in the budget. It's still a money in the budget, overall budget, that even though it has shifted from one department to the other, it's not that we have reduced police budget. I think we need to be careful when we say we take money from police to put in other areas, because it creates that perceived division in the conversation. So just an observation on my end to just be cautious of that.
Thank you, Mayor Sohi. Councillor Tang.
Thank you, and thank you, everybody. I think this has been, it's been a good discussion, and I am conscious of time, but I also feel the need not to rush through a lot of this. I mean, I'll be honest, I really struggle with this report. I read it a few times, I made a lot of notes, and I just feel like I'm reading a report about anti-racism advisory group, which of course there's lots overlap for sure, but that along with, here's what we're already doing and more of the same that's centering around service providers. I think, the specific recommended grants, I have a lot of respect for the people who do that work, of course. And when you have organizations that's largely volunteer-based, they just want to get the work started. But I think what I'm really struggling with is, while we all know there's lots of priority on the table, and we're in some really critical time of need, think I'm just worried that I don't have the tools to make that decision or to really understand the decision-making process. And I want to build on what Councillor Rutherford had brought up around a theory of change. A theory of change will allow this council to say, we're supporting this decision because of all these things that leads to the outcome that's going to happen, and in a way that builds public confidence and trust in our decision-making capability. And I'm having a hard time because I feel like I don't see that. I am happy to support us, moving this towards council for fuller discussion, because I think we're going to need it as part of a bigger budget deliberation. But what I want to ask, and I don't know how to ask this, and if I'm entering motion territory, please let me know. But what I would really appreciate in the new year is that administration provide a set of tools, like an outcomes framework, like a theory of change, not only for the larger community well-being and safety initiative, but also how that ties to the granting process. I mean, we are about to, we're allocating 1.2 to ARAC. I know that they're doing incredibly important work, but we haven't really seen what's coming out of the 300,000 that we just approved. Not to mention there is an anti-racism strategy on the table that I hope through that work will come up with some of this outcomes framework. And so without that robust decision-making tool in place, I think I'm just really a little bit worried about ad hoc decision-making here. So I guess I'm just wondering, would that be possible? Even if it's a plan to say, how are we going to get there? I think I just need something a bit more concrete and to help with the decision-making.
Thank you. I'm going to try and answer that question based on, when we're talking about change, the theory of change, we heard loud and clear from the 100+ people that came to public hearing. We've heard from mutual aid groups. We've heard from anti-racism activists that the system that we have now, and I mean the big system in terms of law enforcement, encampments, shelters, is not working. So if I can take those 2 or 3 pieces of funding from this year and look at the work that we want to do forward, that system needs to change. And we've heard that potentially an Indigenous shelter would make that change. We've heard that the way that encampments are enforced would create that change and move that change forward. I cannot at this point in time say to you that I have a definitive theory of change based on each one of these measures that we're talking here. And the reason I can't yet is because they've been created by governments and organizations, and now we're asking other people to the table. And we're saying to people like the mutual aid groups and to anti-racism activists, we need to create this better. We need to change the system. So I can't give you a chart today that's going to tell you that theory of change, but I can tell you that these initiatives on this table are designed. They're quite fluid right now because we can't design them alone. They need that input from those others.
I can certainly appreciate that, but earlier when I asked how were, for example, the Sister Dialogue and the Africa Center for Civic Engagement, how were those kind of identified? You mentioned that through lots of conversations with communities, but I also imagine your team talks to lots and lots of community groups like every single day.
Oh yeah.
Right, and I think I'm just a little bit perplexed of how we even. Why? I mean, I understand why. I mean, you've explained that, but I just feel like, is that how we're going to keep having these conversations moving forward? And I would like to see something that really tie everything together. So just as a general framework. So my time is out, so I'll end there. Thank you.
And I'll just say I'm looking for that too, and we're just not there yet, Councillor. We're just not. We're getting closer, but we're not there yet.
Thank you, Councillor Rice.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have follow-up a few questions. So I would like to build on the Councillor Hines' comment. I'm struggling as well, and for this decision, and then specifically right now, and in this moment, and then I just look back and to what what we heard and from most Edmontonians wants. And so most Edmontonians, I believe our Edmonton is a city, everybody care about each other. And we want to support some people, we want to support some spatial like population. And however is how we do it. And so the question is how we do it. And then as a result, as an outcome, we would like to say, and every dollar we spend here will reflect the value, reflect the most Edmontonians wanted. And so by that, and then I would ask the question I didn't get a chance asking first time is about evaluation framework. So every time when the grant application process, and we have that framework in place already, and then we have the measurable outcomes already here, and we know where we want to go, we know where, what type of growth and the impact, and for the money spent, and for those initiatives we want achieved. So I would like to say, and then further conversation is needed, and specifically for us to build that evaluation framework in place, and for all those and grant application, and to ensure we are moving towards the same direction and achieve the outcome the most Edmontonians want. So that is my first comment or suggestion. And the second, the question I would like to ask is about, and because by looking at each year starting from 2020, and $5.5 billion allocated to the social and community development side. And so if that is the case, if you look at the on November 8th, we just approved another over 200,000 and grant and for anti-racism advisory committee. And this time, and we have $1.174 million to go out. So my question is, by looking at all the grants, and not only this piece, if you look at the $5.5 million breakdown, is there any possibility for some area has overlap funding and for the grants? And so if that is the case, and so is any process in administration side, we can look at this overlap grants funding. And it's also from three level governments. I do believe from social service perspective and federal government, provincial government, city government, and where is our city's position? And for that, is there any overlap grants for that? So if there are overlap grants, is there any outcome, is common outcome we are achieve, we are towards to? And so I think this funding spending specifically is ongoing every year. And for the $5.5 million is not just only one time. And that is based on my understanding and from earlier conversation. So I would like to support, we have further conversation about this before make any firm decision yet.
Maybe I'll take the first part of the question, Councillor, and then pass it over to Ms. Ford on the potential for overlap between grants. Really just to amplify a little bit of what's been talked about, the notion of measurable outcomes and an evaluation framework. We certainly acknowledge the importance of having that. We don't have it as crisp as we want to or need to, so certainly that work is underway, working with ARAC and being able to show that return on investment that the council and the community taxpayers are getting for that investment. So we know we have to do that. It isn't because there are many organizations involved in that work. That sort of collective impact is critical. So that work is getting legs, but it hasn't crystallized yet to a point where it's at council. So with that, maybe I'll just pass it over to Jackie to talk about the potential overlap of grants.
Thanks, Rob. Councillor, there are times when one project will apply for grants from all different levels of government and also from foundations as well. Right now, our application doesn't say, are you receiving grant funding from anyone else? But it could. I would caution, though, to say that a lot of these projects are much bigger than any one grant could fund. So it isn't uncommon for organizations to apply for grants from every level of and every source of funding that they can.
Okay, thank you. My time is up.
Thank you. Councillor Wright, did you have more questions? You're on the list here. It might be left over.
Yeah, I think it's a leftover.
Okay, thank you. So I see no one else on the list. Absent a motion to accept the recommendation, I would suggest this gets requisitioned to council.
So moved.
And I will requisition it as well. So that's not necessarily a motion, but that takes the conversation to the next council meeting and ends the discussion here.
So just to be clear, it's not that anybody is not willing to move the motion. I think just we want to have a more discussion at council because other council
Yes.
members want to be.
Yeah.
Kind of, okay, yes, okay, got it. Because I could have moved the motion, but I think it deserves more debate at council, and other council members needs to weigh in as well. Thank you.
Point of order. Is a requisition debatable?
No. Once two councillors or two committee members requisition it, it automatically goes to council, and it's not debatable.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you have to? Are you good?
Yes, you and I
Okay,
have
good.
requisitioned it, so it's going to council, and the conversation will continue. Okay, that takes us then to item 6.2. Again, just a reminder, we have a time specific at 2:30.
We'll just get the balance of our delegation down.
Sure.
And since I'm doing the presentation, why don't I just dive in as they get settled? So for item 6.2 this afternoon, from City Administration, joined by Jackie Ford again for this item. Judy Smith, on your far right. Judy is our Director of Community Resources in Jackie's branch. And also joining administration as part of our delegation, Eric Atman. Eric is the Executive Director of End Poverty Edmonton. And also, we have also online, Cheryl Whiskey Jack. Cheryl is the co-chair of End Poverty Edmonton. And we also have Rob Yeager. Rob is the CEO of United Way of the Alberta Capital Region, who is also online. So the End Poverty Edmonton work started over 5 years ago as a council initiative and was elevated to a mayor's task force and then to a community collaborative. City Council at that time approved funding for 5 years for the operating costs of the collaborative as well as for many initiatives. Many of the initiatives that were listed in the original strategy have been embedded into programming and services within the city and or community. This includes, and these are just a few examples, a living wage policy for the City of Edmonton, expanded financial empowerment initiatives, free transit passes for vulnerable youth, free transit for children 12 and under, Edmonton Mental Health Action Plan, suicide prevention strategy, and established a community development corporation. The original 5-year agreement ends this year at the end of December, so the administration felt it was timely to do an evaluation focused on the End Poverty Edmonton initiative and the implementation of the roadmap actions. And there are 5 recommendations in the evaluation report. 1, set clear priorities. 2, strengthen the evaluation methods to better track and measure progress. 3, review the governance structure to clarify roles and responsibilities between the various structures within End Poverty Edmonton. 4, ensure the new funding agreement with the United Way clearly defines roles, responsibilities, and accountabilities. And finally, number 5, find a place in the initiative to include people with lived experience. So administration has met with End Poverty Edmonton leadership and discussed some of the steps moving forward. Work has already started with the United Way leadership to ensure that any future funding agreements will contain more clarity for them as the backbone organization and the fiscal agent for the collaborative. On August 11th this year, 2021, City Council made a motion that asked the administration to develop a service package for ongoing funding for consideration as part of the 2021 fall supplemental budget adjustment for End Poverty Edmonton. So that's a quick overview of the report. We can now pass it back to the chair for questions.
Thank you. I believe that Councillor Tang selected this. We'll go to you first, Councillor Tang.
Thank you so much. You probably will hear some common theme in some of my questions today, but I guess I want to start off with some specific points raised in the evaluation report. The first is the involving people with lived experience. The way I understood it was for the past 5 years, there actually has always been that structure in place to involve people with lived experience, but it was never really active. I mean, what lessons did you learn from that that will prompt you to do things differently?
Thank you, Councillor. When the initial framework for End Poverty Edmonton came up, there was the idea of different tables of experience, and I think that was the term they actually used. There'd be an Indigenous table and lived experience table and funders table. And the lived experience table didn't materialize in the way that some of the others did. And when we talk now about including people with lived experience, of course, the entire framework of the entire lens of End Poverty Edmonton is centered on people with lived experience. What do people with poverty, what can we do today, and how can we involve them in creating some of the solutions to get them out of poverty? What we found in our evaluation is that wasn't as structured as it might have been or could be. So going forward, we would never want people to just have to tell their story just over and over and over again. But what we suggest is that End Poverty Edmonton find a way to use to use their table and use their round table to hear those voices in a more structured way when necessary, never causing any harm for people by just saying, I need your voice for the sake of hearing your voice.
Yeah, and we're moving to more of a systems approach, so changing the game. And what we're using people with lived experience to do, or how we're involving them, is helping us understand how the current system is affecting them. So what needs to change in the current system for you to achieve what you want to achieve so the provincial housing regulations, they trap people in social housing. If you're in social housing, you have strong incentives not to get a better job, not to accept a raise, for example, because it jeopardizes your housing. You have strong incentives to discourage your children from going to post-secondary education because it risks your housing. And so they'll say, someone with lived experience can say, I've discouraged my children from going to university because we would lose our housing if they do. We would then go talk to the province and say, you've got a big problem in that you've created this perverse incentive that traps people in their current situation rather than letting them move themselves forward. And so using lived experience to inform more of those systems conversations and systems change. I think like a good example for the city would be, how do you get people who are currently in poverty into the workforce, into your workforce? And they would inform us on what that would look like, what the barriers to employment might be, and then we can help influence policymakers and policy that would benefit them.
So in other words, activating that table perhaps more intentionally and more strategically.
Yeah, I guess the other part of that is in talking to people with lived experience, there's a strong desire to be able to be their own advocates. You have people like me doing their advocacy, and there's a strong desire to be their own voice. And so helping people with lived experience essentially to be able to come here or support them in coming here to be part of this delegation, or the next time you see me to ask you for money during your budget deliberations, there will be people with lived experience talking about what this initiative means to them and how they think it's going to better or reduce poverty in the city.
That's great. Just great to hear that the capacity building aspect. I have some very lots of specific questions, but I think one thing my takeaway from the report is is particularly with the challenge of measurement and outcomes. It's a bit of a chicken and egg. After 5 years, we don't have a solid measurement framework to measure the work we're doing on poverty, reduction, but we need more resources to do that work. And can you just help me think like talk me through a bit more around that? What is the, now that you have homed in on 5 very tangible, I would say, priority areas, would it be easier now to move towards that direction of an outcomes-based framework?
Yeah, for sure. I think the evaluation probably asked the wrong question. It answers the question, is End Poverty Edmonton a good initiative? The bigger question was, did the roadmap that the Mayor's Task Force created, did it help reduce poverty? And I think the answer to that question probably would be not really, because it was a very programmatic response. And we have a lot of programmatic responses to poverty. The unique opportunity that End Poverty Edmonton provides is the ability to start working in the systems. When I was the executive director of a social agency, I could see all these problems with the system, but my job was to run the organization, and that's where I spent my time. The frustration that I had in that job led me to wanting this one, because this is a place where you can start attacking those systems, where you can get to the root causes of some of these issues. And so our work is going to be organized around essentially 8 pillars. We call them game changers, not great language, but 8 pillars. So one of them would be racism. You can't program your way out of racism, and you can't get people of color to be the ones solving racism. You need to attack it at a systems level. And so we've got a table of 50 people who represent systems like the police, like Alberta Health Services, like the schools, and they're working on how do you collect race-based data, because then we can start talking about what systemic racism looks like in our community and whether or not those interventions, those programmatic interventions, are actually working. And so, yeah, there will be a much more measurable thing. I think Edmonton's going to be, if there's a city that can do this, like end poverty, it's us, and we need to be able to show them how we did it. And so measuring that, documenting it, evaluating it is really, really important to being able to tell our story about how Edmonton was the first city, in the world to get on this.
Thank you. Councillor Rutherford.
Thank you very much. I echo a lot of the same questions and concerns that Councillor Tang has already brought up. I'm familiar with the collective impact model, but again, I'm cognizant that we are live streaming for the general public. So would somebody please, and collective impact model can also perpetuate differently depending on the structures. Could somebody please just discuss the collective impact model, and then simultaneously the systems approach? Because I think sometimes we talk about the systems approach as a very umbrella term that is very hard for people to understand in concrete terms when you're looking at the spend we're putting in this. So could you please describe, in your words, collective impact and systems approach?
Thank you for the question. I'll start us off. So collective impact is when you're bringing a lot of different organizations together from different sectors for a common agenda. So to combat a common problem, in this case, poverty. So End Poverty Edmonton brings together all those different elements from community together to try to solve the problem. The system that we talk about, that you asked to explain about, is our system of government or our regular system of how we do things. And you had a great discussion about it earlier, about trying to uproot that system a bit and maybe try to do some things a different way. So End Poverty Edmonton is taking this cross, and we hear about it more, and not always as a collective impact approach. Everybody's trying to work in partnership. But this approach is trying to bring different people together to look at the problem in different ways from different perspectives. And in this case, End Poverty Edmonton isn't their own organization. They're bringing people together, and United Way is the backbone and the fiscal agent for that. So that in itself brings difficulties as well that we're trying to work through. But yeah.
And has the United Way taken on all of those 5 tenets of backbone support? Because there's 5 tenets to backbone support.
Yeah, that's one of the things we're going to be working on with this next agreement, because I don't think that was as strong in the foundation, and that's where some of the cracks have been happening. But they've been an excellent fiscal agent. The vision for ending poverty in our community and the willingness to do that in a collaborative spirit is strong. So unless Mr. Yager's online, he might have more to add to that.
I think Rob is online. Do you want to weigh in, Rob?
Hi, everyone. No, I think that was covered quite well. I think the way the work happens and certainly the complexity of it all requires us to be really, really clear about who's responsible for what. And I think we've got a great foundation we can work from in establishing, the parameters for moving this forward.
Okay, and I would just like to end with highlighting my concern that we've done 5 years of systems work without real involvement of people with, I'm going to clarify, there's a distinction between lived and living experience, and I hope we're doing both. Because to me, you cannot address poverty if you're not wholeheartedly holding the principle of nothing about us without us. So my question is, what are we going to do different to ensure that we're not doing anything about people with poverty without people with poverty at the table?
So I wouldn't say we've done 5 years of systems work. This is a pivot from the roadmap, which was not systems focused, to being more systems focused, and that will have sort of these 8 pieces of work that are very systems focused. The plan is still to have those same tables that Jackie mentioned. There's a funders table, there's the stewardship round table, there's a lived experience table, and there's the Indigenous circle. And essentially that constitutes the governance of End Poverty Edmonton. That's how our work is generated. That's who generates our work. And each of those tables has a say. The stewardship roundtable is sort of the bigger umbrella one, and every group, all those other groups are represented at the big table. So that bigger table will have representation for people with lived experience.
But as long as they're treated like content experts, right? Because I think that often in my practice I've seen that people with lived or living experience are kind of tokenized a bit and brought on. And I'm not saying that that's what's happening here, but it's just, if we are funding this going forward, and if we are saying that this is one of the things we're going to focus on, I want to see that happen. So I just want to make sure that they are compensated and seen and treated as content experts. So that's just a piece of sentiment that I'd like to leave with.
Yeah,
Thank you.
100%. Like, there is no desire to tick a box. There's no point. That would be wasting my time too. So yeah, there is no desire to do something like that.
And just the power structures that exist,
Yeah,
right?
I think one of the things that we've found, especially at the Stewardship Roundtable, is that those lived experience conversations really take things from theory to practice. So when somebody can say, this is how it affected me, it sort of is a bit of a wake up to other people who are looking at it in a more theoretical way or a policy perspective. So I think it adds a lot of value, and I don't think we would, I should get fired if I were to be tokenistic about that approach.
Thank you.
And if I could just pop in, sitting at those, I personally sit at the Stewardship Roundtable, and I can assure everyone in this room that I have never seen that group treat anyone with anything other than respect, and their voices are heard at every one of those meetings. The reason that it came up in the evaluation is we, from an evaluator's perspective, we wanted it to be just a little bit more strategic and process-driven. But I can tell you that it's never been an issue in terms of treating those people, those folks, in any way, shape, or form as a token input.
Thank you. Councillor Stevenson.
Hi, thank you so much for the report. It's really exciting to hear about the work that's happening, and I think that shift from programs to systems change is an incredibly exciting one, and really applaud your efforts there. And I have all these thoughts I'm having trouble organizing, so apologies if I'm bouncing around a little bit. But maybe just a first clarifying question. So you mentioned there's an unfunded budget package coming forward for the fall operating. Is that for a 1 year, or is that sort of another 5-year proposal?
The motion speaks to ongoing.
Okay, and is it a similar level as it has been in the past in terms of that ongoing annual, I think it's about $750,000?
That's correct.
Okay, but it's currently unfunded.
That's also correct.
Okay, so it's challenging because I think having this budget is going to be a very difficult one. For me, there's so much value in maintaining the momentum that's been built and ensuring that we don't lose that momentum. At the same time, I feel like the evaluation highlighted some interesting opportunities to explore. For example, who the fiscal agent is. I mean, again, I don't even know if it's been explored if End Poverty Edmonton becomes its own legal entity. There's mention in the report as well that there may be identification of different resources that End Poverty Edmonton needs to expand their capacity. So I feel like all of those questions are really important. And if we lock into the next 5 years, we maybe don't get to explore some of those opportunities as well. So the question is maybe, is $750,000 for the next year the appropriate number to help you look at these recommendations, come up with a strategy moving forward, and keep the momentum going? Do we want to do that for 1 year? Do we want to just lock in for 750 for the next 5 years? Just maybe some thoughts about different strategies to ensuring that the budget deliberation is successful and then helps you realize the opportunities.
So what I think so I've been here for coming close to 2 years, and I think what we learned was how to structure systems work. And that is essentially you need to have content experts. In our case, we started with 2 on lived wages because while there's a lot more to poverty than your income's always a part of it. And so we started working on livable wages. And we hired 2 content experts and essentially said, try to figure this out. And they've been figuring it out. And I think that's the model, is to bring 2 people on to each of these things, whether it's mental health, housing, or anti-racism. It's to bring on 2 content experts, and they start convening tables to figure out how to start addressing this at a systems level. And again, the great thing about Edmonton is everybody will meet with you. Like everybody, it doesn't matter who they are or how busy they are, they'll find time to talk to you about poverty and how can I be a part of that solution. So we're having conversations with liquor stores about livable wages, conversations with the recycling plant, who has now decided there's a good business sense for them to pay livable wages and to ensure that nobody in their organization makes minimum wage. And so that's changing how we go about doing business, but you need to essentially be resourced, and that's the model, is to get 2 people and then sort of scale up as opportunity emerges and then get out of that line because you've created a structure that the community then will own, and Poverty Edmonton no longer needs to be driving the table, the initiative, the conversation, like the city adopting a living wage policy. We don't need to talk to you about living wages because it's there.
Well, and I guess that's just my question. If you have the 8 pillars that you're focused on and you wanted 2 subject matter experts for those, is $750,000 going to cover that?
No, like with communications and the additional pieces that we need, like an evaluator, those things, which can cover all of those, which can go to the other pillars, we can take on 2 right now.
Okay, thank you. That clarifies. And just for my understanding, if we were to fund the unfunded budget this fall, can we revisit that decision with the 4-year operating? Like, could we look if that needed to expand as part of the 4-year operating budget?
You could choose to fund it one time and then look at it for 2023 to 2026. It's harder to go the other way, though. It's harder to agree to fund something ongoing and then curtail it back to one time.
Right. Okay, and I think, so over this next year, presumably you could potentially come back with additional resources that you may want for the next 4 years, for that 4-year budget cycle. Yeah, okay. Great. I'm out of time.
Thank you. Councillor Jans.
First of all, I just wanted to say thank you for the frankness of the evaluation. I think it was very helpful to read, and I think outlining the challenges and the opportunities was very helpful, and especially I think for many of the new councillors. Well, speaking personally, it was helpful to kind of highlight some of the journey to date, if we will. I was wondering if our guests could elaborate a little more on opportunities or challenges working with other orders of government, and because I was really interested in some of the advocacy work that was outlined there, but wanted to hear a little bit more about the value add around the advocacy piece that EPE has provided.
Which level of government?
Dealer's choice.
So Federally, it's been a challenge because we haven't had anyone in government that we can talk to. So we talk to the opposition, which is helpful to get your ideas brought forward. So basic income was one that we spoke to every MP in Alberta about, and it was on their radar. They were asking, I think, better questions. I know they had caucus discussions about basic income, whether or not the individual parties would support it, but without sort of a direct line to cabinet, it's been a bit of a challenge because you had to go through Winnipeg essentially to get on the radar with the Liberal government. Now it should be easier, having a couple of MPs and having a minority government where the NDP should have influence, and so we should have more allies at a federal level and easier access to influence. Provincially, we have a lot of conversations with senior administration, so a lot of deputy ministers and assistant deputy ministers on policy. There's less ability to influence because of how centralized decision-making is provincially. So even meeting with a minister doesn't necessarily result in an action. So we've got a lot of support for social procurement. So using that, we have a lot of business people who are pushing the social procurement agenda with us, but access to ears has not been very easy. Is that too cloaked?
No, I think it's valuable, and I think it highlights some of the complexity of this work too. Many of the stakeholders at the table, as I heard you share, I'm mindful are provincially funded, or they may have some perceived limitations on if they get to a head of this government or any government, that this could have funding implications and challenges for them as well. So it's sort of being mindful of I'm interested in if you would share about being an advocacy organization with these stakeholders and roundtables, many of whom are social services, but are trying to play an advocacy role, but they also are limited by, I don't want to name anyone in particular, but it's just a challenging dynamic, even and resource scarcity, et cetera, will only worsen it.
That's the beauty of End Poverty Edmonton is essentially we're funded by three entities, the city, the United Way, and the Community Foundation, and so I don't have those restrictions. I'm not biting the hand that, well, if I point out something that you're doing, well, more Jackie's hand I'd be biting, but like I don't have that issue. Like you see it a lot in like the homeless conversations where people are skirting around an issue. They don't want to name it because there's a lot of funding involved with it, and so we don't have that. We have the ability to be the mouthpiece on an issue and be very controversial. I don't have to have the filter that I used to have when I was talking with the other orders of government, because they're probably the biggest system that needs to change. And like clearly the city's in on this with a lot of the policies that the city's adopted. You want to do your part. The city's clearly wanting to do its part to reduce poverty, but you're not the big players. And so those big players, they really need to be the ones to change. Like Alberta Health Services fundamentally needs to shift if it's going to actually do what it's meant to be doing, or housing. And I think one of the challenges we have with the provincial government right now too is there's a lot of announcements without a lot of substance behind those announcements. So that the recent housing announcement is a really good example where there's a lot of we're going to do this, but no clarity on how to get there. And so the announcement is great that you want to reduce the need for social housing, but the path is not clear, and so we don't know what conversations we need to be pushing for because the direction isn't clear. We support your desire to reduce the need for social housing, but unless we know how you want to do that, we can't advocate for something.
Thank you. We've reached the time for our time specific. So I'm from my colleagues, we have 2 speakers left. Is there a desire for a second round, or will 2 speakers be it?
I would have to leave if I don't get to ask
Okay.
now, then I won't be able to come back. I have
Okay,
a
so
meeting
let's extend for 10 minutes and then move to our time specific. So thank you, Mayor Sohi. Please go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
No, thank you. Appreciate that accommodation because I have a 3 o'clock meeting that I must attend. My question, I think all of us are quite concerned about the situation of houselessness and pending winter, not only short term but long term. And one thing that I've been trying to grapple my thinking around is that we have seen houseless population double over the last 2 years. Yes, pandemic has contributed to it. Just want to understand from your perspective, like how much poverty has contributed to that? Because if we don't close that thing that feeds into houselessness, right? So I just want to understand from your perspective. Like I'm trying to understand various aspects, why our numbers have gone up, but how much poverty has contributed to that.
For sure. The pandemic has caused all kinds of issues around poverty, and we've definitely seen an increase in Edmonton. I think, though, like, to bring it back to a systems discussion, and the rest of the panel may give me a dirty look, and they can then explain their thoughts, but I think we've created a shelter system that's designed for one purpose, which is to keep people alive, full stop. That's the one metric they care about. Nobody died in the shelter tonight, which is not a reasonable metric for a shelter system. The system should be to get people to housing. But then there's an issue with essentially housing first. You have housing for a year, and this is oversimplification, but essentially you time out of it, and there's no transition to get you into social housing. So you're then sort of stuck in the cycle of returning to housing first. If you're in social housing, like I said, there's a lot of incentives to keep you there, and so to keep you from leaving social housing, so you'll stay in those units because there's no plan to transition you into market housing. And so that's a system being broken in a lot of ways, designed to keep you alive, designed to keep you at a minimum standard, but not designed to move you into market housing and to be able to pay rent like everybody else and feel good about that. And so that's where an End Poverty Edmonton inserts itself into the conversation to say this system isn't working, because what there should be is a way for you to get from homelessness, houselessness to market housing, and we have no system to.
So are you interacting with the shelter providers, Homeward Trust, pushing them to look at more of a systemic change?
Yeah, and with the administration also asking us to help create more of a system, more of a systemic approach to housing. There's a system to getting funding to build housing, but not really a housing system. And so that's the piece that Edmonton needs to work on, is developing a system that will allow us to address our housing issue. We can't build our way out of it. Like 10,000 families on the wait list for social housing is just, you can't build that many units. You just can't do it. So you need to work on then the demand. Like, why do we have so many people on that list? So yes, we keep building, but yes, we're working on people not needing that, and also creating more space by moving people out of social housing into market housing, because that creates a whole unit of social housing when somebody moves out. And so how do we develop the mechanisms to do that? And that's the space that End Poverty Edmonton is. Because all those housing providers, they're worried about more units because they're looking at their wait list and the big demand. Somebody needs to be worried about that systemic approach to addressing housing needs.
Yeah. And in your current scope of activities and authorities, do you have that convening power where you can bring people together to talk about these issues, or you just try to pursue them in a way that because you on a
No, like I said, people in Edmonton will meet with you on just about anything and just about any. Yeah, it's coming from the eastern part of this country. It is phenomenal to live in this town for that reason alone. Our issue is not the convening. Our issue will be when we need to move to action. We
Right.
won't have the bodies to do it, but we can get everybody in a room to identify the issues, and essentially that will help put some pressure on you to give us the resources to do that work, because we're collectively asking for it.
Yeah, no, thank you, because that goes back to our earlier conversation as well on the anti-racism work and intersecting aspect of that to many other things, including poverty. Right? No, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Marsohi. Councillor Paquette.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Ammon, just hoping to untangle maybe what might be a bit of confusion here. Reading the report, it might give the impression that EPE had this sort of mandate, and then they struggled to fulfill their own roadmap. But the reality is that is not what EPE was set up to do. Like, you were a convener and a reporter and an urger, but you actually don't have funding or capacity or mandate to actively start effecting change. Is that not right?
Yeah, no, I mean, the bulk of the roadmap is not in the purview of End Poverty Edmonton. It lies with other people.
Yeah, and that was the way it was designed, and the thinking around how to address poverty has very much evolved over time. When you came on, things started to change a little bit. Can you speak about that a little, so for the benefit of council?
Yeah, I think it reflected that frustration with like, until these systems change, we're going to have these issues because we're essentially designed to have issues. We're essentially designed to have poverty in our community. And so it was a need to change what we were doing. The trap of an End Poverty Edmonton is that somebody who's going to ask you to justify your existence, and then you're going to need to get some kids and puppies in a room together. You're going to have meetings, whether or not they're relevant. You're going to need to have a bunch of meetings to show that you're really important. And I think that was probably the trap that End Poverty Edmonton had fallen into, was this need to demonstrate we're good, not losing sight of we need to end poverty in Edmonton. And it becomes about sort of justifying the existence of the initiative as opposed to trying to achieve that idea, that audacious goal of not having poverty in a city as big as Edmonton.
Right. So basically, I mean, your role was to convene groups so that everyone can sort of coordinate and align their efforts and have a common roadmap and vision. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's about bringing together everybody in food security to not talk about hampers, to talk about how do you create an Edmonton where people do not need hampers, not how to more efficiently distribute those hampers or have halal meats in hampers to Muslim families. It's about bringing people together to have that bigger conversation about, we have a problem that we want to go away. What does it take to make that go away? And to Judy's point about collective impact, it's not just for the food bank to solve food security in the city. It's about the corporate community coming together and not making donations, but figuring out how to do that differently, how to pay people living wages so that there isn't a need for a food bank. But it's about bringing a community together to solve something as big as that.
Yeah, then that makes sense because that actually leads to enormous amounts of efficiencies across the board so that people aren't duplicating efforts or trying to not solve a problem, but how do you solve the chip on the wheel instead of like how do you get to your destination? So, but there are tangible benefits that also come out of EP that we can point to, like the fight and success on livable wages, on local procurement, which is huge, training and skills, women in trades, trade wins, and so on. So the results that come out of End Poverty Edmonton are innumerable, but they are all results that are coming from different organizations because that is not your mandate. Your mandate is to make things more efficient, more aligned, and give a clear direction. But you're also growing on your mandate and re-envisioning it at the same time, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, End Poverty Edmonton, ironically, will never be the ones to end poverty in Edmonton, but we can be a catalyst in ending poverty. I think we've had a lot of success in terms of economic development conversations in the region, that there's a need for labor outside of Edmonton, but a great difficulty in getting Edmontonians to those opportunities. And so how do they address that? And so being in the room to have those conversations, or with the building trades unions and the construction industry, about how do we bring in more diverse people? How do we bring more women into the trades? Because selfishly, the trades know that they're in trouble if they don't do that. Construction knows that it has labor demands it can't meet unless it figures out how to employ people differently.
Oh, sorry, I got to interrupt you because I'm out of time.
Yeah.
But my last comment, I guess, would be that because of the benefits that come out of your work, and because the scope is different than any other organization, realistically, if we wanted to end poverty, we should actually be funding you maybe more robustly and giving you more empowerment to go and align all of these different organizations. Thoughts on that? And I'm done. Thank you.
I have no bias in answering this question to say yes, we should get a lot more funding, and No, but I honestly think that like this is a very different initiative, and when I talk to my counterparts in other cities, they've all had to fall into the trap that Poverty Edmonton was, which is you start needing to justify what you're doing, and you can't claim the outcomes. If we end poverty in Edmonton, nobody's going to point to us. They're going to point to the business community. They're going to point to social services. They're going to point to the city and showing leadership on a lot of the policy fronts. Nobody's going to point to us, and we can't take any credit. Like I said, we just are trying to stir out the pot a little bit. And hopefully, I don't know what the system for appointment is, but hopefully we have the mayor and two councillors at the stewardship roundtable going forward. Because I think, again, like I think you guys have been a big part of like helping row this ship and helping us sort of figure out where we need to be and how to get into those rooms.
Thank you. So we do have a funding item coming to budget that we'll talk about separately from this. The recommendation from administration is to receive this report for information. So I would take a motion on that.
So moved.
Thank you, Councillor Tang. Typically, I'd invite speaking to it, but I'm hesitant to do that. I'm just going to go to the vote if we can. Please vote.
We have all the votes.
Please display the vote. And that is carried 4-0. Thank you very much, everyone, for administration. Thanks, Mr. Atman, for joining us today. Really appreciate your insights. We will move now to item 6.5, which is the Lewis Farms Facility and Park Expression of Interest. Is there an admin presentation? Looks like, okay. And just while we're letting administration get set up, the way this will work, just as a reminder, is that we will hear administration's presentation. We'll then hear from our speakers in panels, which means each speaker will have 5 minutes to speak consecutively. And once both speakers have spoken, then all councillors have the opportunity to take 5 minutes at a time to ask questions of our speakers. Then we'll let our speakers go, and again, councillors have 5 minutes to ask questions of administration following that.
Mr. Chair, if for future we want to set something that's time sensitive, do committee members have the ability to do that? Is it just at our guests? When we set the agenda, can we suggest something?
It's best to suggest time specifics through the chairs of the committee to come up at agenda review committee and have it set that way. So that way it's set in the agenda when the agendas are published. Thank you, Mr. Laughlin. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of committee. Short presentation that Mr. Malifsta will deliver. Just a reminder, Jason is our branch manager of infrastructure delivery, and then we also have other staff that are available to answer questions when it is our time. So over to Mr. Malifsta, and the presentation is up. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, good afternoon. This report and presentation provides information in response to a motion approved on February 8th, 2021, requesting an expression of interest for external partners interested in partnering with the city on the Lewis Farms facility and park. This presentation will provide a brief understanding of the project background, including some of the strategic background and policy guidance. The history and milestones, including previous council reports and budget approvals in terms of how we got here today. The current status of the project, including a current financial overview, a review of the EOI process itself and what we heard in terms of a market response, and finally a recommendation around next steps. And joining us today to support and help answer any questions are staff from Citizen Services, Finance and Corporate Services, and Integrated Infrastructure Services. Next slide, please. The Lewis Farms Facility and Park Project was first conceptualized as part of the 2005 Recreation Master Plan. The 2005 Recreation Master Plan contributed directly to the development of numerous rec centers, including the Terwilliger Rec Center, Stadium, Clairview, and Meadows Rec Centers. The Lewis Farms facility is an extension of that same strategic plan and was further refined based on the feedback from the public, which provided consideration towards planned demand, available park space, and how best to balance the fiscal requirements to achieve the project. Leading through the planning and design for this project, there have been 4 rounds of specific and targeted public and stakeholder engagement for the Lewis Farms project. And these public engagement events included numerous open houses, online surveys, and stakeholder meetings. More recently, a new strategic plan stewarding the development of rec center planning was developed and approved in 2018 to replace the 2005 Recreation Master Plan. The approach to community recreation facility planning, as shown on this slide, was approved as well. Next slide, please. Administration would like to highlight briefly that although this project began prior to the approval of Council's capital project governance policy, it has advanced in stages and gates similar to the PDDM process outlined to Council a few weeks ago. Over the course of the last few years, administration has refined cost estimates, reaffirmed scope, and undertaken value engineering throughout this time. Check-ins with Council, such as the one today, are consistent with our plan, develop, deliver process. These Council interactions are summarized on this slide going back a number of years. This ensures Council has the most up-to-date information for critical infrastructure decisions like this one today in support of Council's goals and meeting citizen expectations. Next slide, please. Briefly, the following 2 slides provide an overview of the scope of the project. First, in relation to the facility, it includes 3 distinct components. The first and the largest, which is core to the facility, is the Community Recreation Center. This includes a fitness center with cardio and weight training, fitness studios, and a running track, 3 gymnasiums, multi-purpose spaces, twin NHL-sized indoor ice rinks, a full aquatic program similar to the other rec centers, however, with the addition of a 7.5 and 10-meter dive platform and an additional 53-meter lane pool. The second part of the facility is the Lewis Farms Library. This 18,000 square foot library is similar to the one that was recently built as part of the Clairview and Meadows rec centers. And then third, an academic center, which was developed in partnership with the Edmonton Catholic School District. It should be noted that the Edmonton Catholic School District, since we've worked through and evolved the design, has shifted priorities and is no longer intending to partner with the city on this project. Next slide, please. The scope of the district park includes a number of outdoor open spaces, including sports fields and recreation areas, as shown on this slide. A plaza will be the main focal point of the facility to the public, providing pedestrian access to the main entry area of the facility, acting as a destination and platform for social and civic life in space, including space for a seasonal market. It also includes a network of walkways and trails, creating connections between the parking area and the main building and outdoor amenities. Next slide, please. This slide provides an overview of the current status of the project in relation to the project development and delivery model. The project currently resides at checkpoint 4. This represents the end of the design phase for the project, with tender-ready drawings having been developed. The project currently has an approved budget of $28.5 million that has been invested in a combination of land acquisition, planning and design activities, as well as the detailed design and tender documents, which I referred to. The unfunded delivery currently is accounted at $298.9 million. This includes the Edmonton Catholic School District space for an academic center, which I referred to a minute ago, which is estimated at a cost of $20 million. And it also includes the required off-site servicing infrastructure, estimated at approximately $10 million if construction were to start today. Next slide, please. In the most recent development on this project, administration was directed to undertake an expression of interest related to this project. This non-binding, market-based process was intended to elicit potential partnerships or innovations related to the delivery of this project. Next slide, please. As seen on this slide, the EUI process and timeframes included an internal stakeholder engagement process, market consultation and interviews with various partners, the development of the EUI framework, its release and close, which happened between July 6th and July 29th, followed by an administrative review and analysis of the submissions, and finally, the council report preparation and finalization. Next slide, please. Administration received 7 responses to the EOI. The results are represented in the heat map shown on this slide. The proponent submissions are categorized in 3 broad categories, including 3 builders and developers, largely comprising of contractors and P3 consortiums primarily interested in the construction of the project, 3 program operators, for example, program operators either involved in the capital development as part of a P3 or a design bid finance operate and maintain project, or partners interested in standalone programming or operating like the arenas. It also included a submission by 1 maintenance and building operator, somebody that would be responsible for the day-to-day maintenance of the facility once completed. Next slide, please. Some of the key findings as received from the submissions to the EOI are as follows. Throughout the market consultation, no respondents suggested significant or major changes to the programming of the facility or park. The respondents were largely aware of the amount of public and stakeholder engagement the city has carried out in order to establish the current scope and programming. Numerous respondents brought up different methods to obtain funding, either through borrowing or grants, or possible philanthropic donations. However, the cost of borrowing funds to finance this facility by a private entity would likely be less competitive than the city's typical cost of borrowing. Also, many of the grant organizations listed in the submissions were similar to the grants the city would typically work with, for example, other levels of government. Recreation centers are generally known to be non-profit generating, and admission pricing would require some form of guarantee or subsidy to remain affordable and accessible. Any guarantee of a revenue stream or an operating subsidy as a result of any alternate service delivery model would need to carefully consider the effect to currently available public access programs. These include things like the city's Leisure Access Program, which provides free access for low-income Edmontonians, or the subsidies that are provided to minor or youth sport user groups, or some of the subsidies that are provided to school groups used under the joint use agreement. Some respondents were open to the idea of developing and owning the asset or the facility for lease back to the city. Other respondents suggested that financing through a public-private partnership may reflect differently in the city's debt obligations and potentially would not affect the city's debt ceiling. However, whether the city's borrowing limits are impacted would largely depend on the nature of any kind of an agreement struck and the ownership of that asset. The builder and developer respondents and most operator respondents expressed the desire for some level of involvement in the design or redesign of the project, but did not provide specific details on how this could or would be achieved. Next slide, please. Upon reviewing the submissions, administration evaluated 5 different options to consider in relation to next steps for this project. The first included no change and proceed directly into construction. Netting out the current approved funding, the project would require an additional $298.9 million. This on the assumption that the academic center and the off-site infrastructure are city funded. If tax-supported debt were utilized for financing, an increase in debt borrowing would require a bylaw amendment. With no adjustments to the design, the project is ready for tender and construction could start within 9 to 12 months of funding approval and is estimated to take 4 to 5 years to construct and prepare for service operations. The second option, no change and hold, administration would place the construction of the project on the current unfunded list for council's consideration with the upcoming development of the 23 to 26 capital budget. If funding continued to be deferred, these cost projections would need to be reevaluated and adjusted to address current market conditions. This would allow further time for the off-site construction to potentially be completed by area developers, as well as further time to pursue options reviewed with council previously related to the space for the academic center, which currently does not have a funding source. A third option, change the procurement model. Following the expression of interest, council may direct administration to pursue procurement through a public-private partnership model to deliver the full program with minor adjustments to the current design. However, it is important to note that this will likely not result in an overall cost reduction to the city and will require significant procurement effort, including higher procurement costs. Based on the expression of interest and market consultation, operations would also need to be subsidized through some form of assurance or guarantee by the city beyond facility-generated revenues in alignment with other city facilities. Option 4, scale back or phase the program. One potential option would be to pursue scaling back or phasing the program, starting with preparing the park site for construction. Scaling back the program would provide time for further additional public engagement to identify the level of prioritization and expectations from the public related to the overall program. This approach to phasing would affect the level of redesign as an integrated facility. There would be technical constraints that would prevent this from being possible without allowing for a redesign in part or full. And an example of this would be that the aquatic program cannot be broken apart from the center hub of the facility, the way it's designed. Fifth, and the final option, would be a third-party operator. The city may explore the use of a third-party operator to achieve potential cost savings in operations, maintenance, and programming. This could be combined with the alternative project delivery model, or P3-like, or pursued independently, but would need well-written and detailed specifications and service expectations. And enhanced contract administration would be required to assure success. The city would likely need to be prepared to accept different pricing and the elimination of some of the various other subsidies like the Leisure Access Program, which I mentioned, before this option were pursued, or some form of guaranteed revenue stream or an operating subsidy paid to the third-party operator. Next slide, please. Administration is currently recommending the following approach. Proceed to phase the program. As funding for the construction of the full project is not approved, and with no timeline for when funding may become available, administration is recommending the preparation of a phasing plan to be completed in 2022, which would describe the scope of work that could be delivered in various phases, but not include the construction itself. As part of the phasing plan, we would anticipate that the Phase 1 scope to likely include site grading, sod, fencing, and base level park amenities for the park site. Phase 1 would also include any necessary off-site infrastructure outside the district park boundary, and the funding for the delivery of the work would be considered for prioritization with the 2023 to 2026 four-year capital budget. That's the end of the presentation, and we'd be happy to answer any questions after hearing from speakers. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Beliefsta. So we'll now move to our speakers. I believe they're both online. Not sure, but our first speaker is Paul Andrews. Are you with us, Mr. Andrews?
I am.
Great, thank you. Thanks for joining us today. You'll have 5 minutes to make your presentation, and then we'll move to other speakers, and then council and committee will have an opportunity to ask you questions. So please proceed. Thank you for your time today.
Okay, thank you. My name is Paul Andrews. I'm a resident of Rosenthal. I'm the president of the Rosenthal Community League, and I'm here to confirm our support for the overall Lewis Farms project and the proposed phased approach. While council has several new faces, the news that the West End is sorely underrepresented did not come as a surprise to anyone. It might, however, surprise you to know that for residents of Nakota Iska and CP Winiwek, we're only serviced by 2 facilities. One, the City of Edmonton-owned Jasper Place Leisure Center, which opened in 1963, and the privately owned Jamie Platt's YMCA, which opened in 1990. While other areas of the city are serviced by at least 3 city-owned facilities, in addition to privately owned ones. Peter Hemingway Leisure Center, often considered as by many as another facility supporting the West, is in fact part of the North Central Zone, according to the Recreation Facilities Master Plan, and coincidentally now closed for refurbishment. Back in late 2016, Jasper Place Leisure Center was closed for what was supposed to be an 18-month refurbishment. 3 years later, in February 2020, the facility reopened to the public with all programming booked at capacity. And as other facilities closed for repairs, the constraints to the system continue to be felt by the increased population. It is also worth noting that these refurbishments are happening simply to keep the facilities from nearing their end of life and to continue safe operation. None of the refurbishments are adding much needed capacity. As a parent of 2 young children, we have chosen to look at other municipalities for aquatics and indoor sports programming due to the lack of space and programming offerings in the city. We're not the only families doing so. The lack of facilities and space have many families looking to St. Albert, Sherwood Park, and Spruce Grove to fill the void, which leads to lost revenue for the city of Edmonton. When the Recreation Facilities Master Plan was published in 2004, a multi-purpose recreation facility in West Edmonton was identified as an immediate need for the city, with a targeted completion by the end of 2019. In 2007, the medium-term recreation facility and sports field plan was approved by City Council and again identified the need for a facility in West Edmonton, which was being built following the completion of Clairview in the Meadows. Between 2011 and 2019, public engagement, program studies, value engineering, and other exercises have been completed on this project, with Council approving the detailed design, which is now complete. This project is shovel-ready, and while Council continues to deliberate on how not to increase our taxes, those of us in the West End are left out in the cold. When Rosenthal became one of the newest community leagues in West Edmonton in 2018, we discussed our long-term goals for the community, and a community hall was never up for consideration. We always considered Lewis Farms Recreation Center, a facility being built in our community, would become the hub for our community, a location for meetings, indoor activities, etc. However, we flash forward to 2021, the project is on hold again. Nearly 20 years later, since the release of the Recreation Facilities Master Plan and almost 60% increase in population since the Jamie Platts YMCA was built, we're still talking about it. The continued delay of the project has put plans by several communities on perpetual hold. Delaying this project further ensures the West End residents continue to be underserviced. In addition, further delay will have impact to costs, projections, and cost of borrowing. The phased approach, while not ideal, appears to be the best approach moving forward with this project. The city has already spent nearly $30 million on engagement, design, and land acquisition. To shelve the project until funding is available would be a disservice to all residents of the West End and the city of Edmonton. With the West End residents who for decades have endured tax increases to support similar facilities designed to meet the needs of a growing city, despite the needs of our backyard getting neglected. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Andrews. We'll go to Kelly Cromwell now.
Hello?
Go ahead, you have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Here we go. Good afternoon. My name is Kelly Cromwell, and I'm the president of the Lewis Estates Community League. I'm also a proud hockey dad that spends the bulk of his free time during evenings and weekends coaching and managing 2 different minor hockey league teams. This year's been a bit of a challenge, and I'm not talking about policies related to arena entry. I'm talking about available ice time, period. Collingwood ice surfaces are closed this year for a mechanical and structural upgrade, which were originally listed as a priority to complete before 2010. I'll get back to that. Participating in minor hockey this year offers a sobering reminder that the only city ice surfaces outside of Collingwood that I can get to within 20 minutes are 50 years old. I'm a 43-year-old man that's lived in West Edmonton his entire life, and both Bill Hunter and Crestwood were cramped substandard rinks back when I played minor hockey at age 7. In fact, most arenas in the city were built in the 60s and early 70s, and there hasn't been a new arena built in West Edmonton since the mid-80s, which is nearly 40 years ago. This is not news to the city of Edmonton. Back in 2007, the 10-year Arena Capital Development Strategy was created, which extended the 2004 Recreation Facility Master Plan. The Arena Development Strategy outlined recommendations to address the growing infrastructure challenges that they knew were on the horizon. Among those recommendations, number 3, 4, 15, and 16 were meant to add capacity in the form of Commonwealth to Williger and the Meadows facilities, as well as the Clairview expansion. Now, among the West Edmonton specific recommendations, number 11 and 12 were maintenance rehabilitations to Castle Downs and Collingwood to be done by 2010. 11 years late, it's finally happening. Now, recommendations 8, 9, and 10 were intended to add capacity to the West by twinning the facilities at Coronation and Grand Trunk, as well as building the new Lewis Farms Twin Arena and Leisure Ice. None of those have happened yet. Now, I want to remind you, the last new arena facility constructed in West Edmonton was in the mid-80s. In 1990, census data showed the population of the city of Edmonton at roughly 605,000 people. The 2019 census shows our population at 972,000 people. That marks a 60% increase in population since the last facility to add capacity in West Edmonton was built. Now, I apologize, I don't have the breakdown of how much population growth happened specifically in West Edmonton, but I do know that the 2019 census listed Secord and Rosenthal as two of the fastest growing communities in the city. Now, obviously, I spend a lot of time in the various city arena facilities, but that's only because my family has given up trying to find a program with capacity and swimming lessons for my 2 young children. We waited 3 years for the Jasper Place pool to reopen after significant refurbishments, and when it did, swimming lessons were booked solid in hours. For now, Terwilliger is always being packed. My family takes our swim trunks to Devon, the Tri Leisure Centre in Spruce Grove, and out to St. Albert if we want to swim. Now, that's how the state of facilities in West Edmonton has impacted my family. But I also want to speak on the topic as the president of the Lewis Estates Community League. This project has been on the drawing board for decades and has influenced most conversations had by dozens of surrounding community leagues and hundreds of volunteers with regards to facility and amenity improvements in their communities. We look at this rec center as providing a meeting spaces, cultural spaces, indoor and outdoor activity spaces, academic spaces, places to develop and deliver social programming and events for our community members. For years, we've had to make do with ad hoc meeting spaces, piggybacking on the goodwill of schools and communities and churches, resigning our social programs to outdoor only in the hopes that eventually we'd have a shared facility to start building out these amenities for our residents. When the funding fell through, many of those plans got put on hold, but that isn't where our frustration ends. The unknown fate of this project continues to handcuff our community league boards and volunteers at virtually every conversation around developing amenity and community improvements. They all end in the same question: what about the rec center? Is that ever going to get built? Many of the surrounding communities are finding it increasingly challenging to plan any kind of neighborhood improvements while the status of this project is still unknown. So the city has invested years and millions of dollars engaging the community, getting this project shovel ready. Its need has been documented since 2004, and at its inception, the original target completion date was 2015. Today, we're still talking about if and not when. I recognize that things change and these are challenging financial times, and that citizens are reluctant to shoulder tax increases of any kind. But for decades, residents of West Edmonton have endured tax increases to support similar facilities designed to meet the growing needs of the city, despite the needs in our own backyard being neglected. So to put it simply, this facility needs to be built one way or another, and it's time to get creative to find out how to get that done. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. We will now go to questions of our speakers, and I'm going to start with Councillor Knack, as this is primarily in his ward. Councillor Knack.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you both for virtually coming today to share your comments. I talk to Mr. Andrews all the time, so Mr. Cromwell, since you're newish to the president role, I want to start with you. You talk about the need to be creative, and I think one of the things that we're going to have to sort of resolve, and I'm going to ask about it with administration over the next year here, is with the Catholic high school changing, we might need to figure out how that particular piece can be developed or what the right solution is. So whether that's engaging with the public school board, Francophone school board, other solutions. Are you, I imagine I know the answer, but just want to check, are you willing to work with myself, Councillor Hamilton, the other community league presidents, and some of the other sort of groups that we need to work with to figure out how we make sure we have a plan for that specific piece of this?
Yeah, absolutely, without question. In fact, our community league is about to undertake a fairly comprehensive community engagement survey that's already been posted online. So we're already collecting a ton of data so that we can act on those types of collaborations.
Excellent. And just to double check, Mr. Andrews, I'm sure you feel the same way, but I just want to confirm that you're willing to come to the table here so we can figure out that piece to the puzzle over the next year.
Yep.
Great. I don't actually have any more questions for the two of you. I just want to thank you both for your time. I've got more questions for our administration, and but appreciate you coming today and sharing the needs of the west end of the city. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Tang.
Thank you so much for both of your excellent presentations and compelling arguments. Frankly, this is, not a project that, I've learned a lot just from the reading the reports, but I'm curious, and I'm sure you've had lots and lots of community conversation about this. If I look at the scope of the project, Is this an all or nothing for the community, or has the community has some conversations around, what is the must-have, what is the next level, and what's the third level in terms of structures and facility? Either one of you would be great.
I can sort of take this. I know out knocking on some doors and talking with community members, it is the number one thing that people want to know what the status is, when it's going to be built. I'm not really sure that it is something that can be piecemealed, because I mean the residents of Lewis Estates, there are people that are hockey parents, there are people that are swim parents. And the fact that we don't have a facility to meet our needs here in the West End, as opposed to looking at the Terwillegar Rec Center, Clairview, the Meadows, even Kinsman and Castle Downs, or not Castle Downs, sorry, Commonwealth. All those quadrants have a facility that is capable of meeting the needs of their residents. Not to mention, eventually, Kinsman Rec Center has to go under refurbishment, which then puts all the families that rely on it for swimming out. And the way Lewis Farms was to be built was to offset some of the losses that you would see in the swim program.
Great, thank you so much. Mr. Cromwell, do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, I think based on the conversations I've had with the community, all or nothing. I'm not sure that that's the right question that the community would really prefer, because we've undergone about 10 years of engagement, and it's been very careful and methodical, and I think at this point, I mean, the residents would just love something that fills either the arena need or the aquatics need or the parks and shared space need, which, I mean, they're all kind of combined. But, the thought of going back to the drawing board, and, while construction costs rise, and it just doesn't really seem like a very feasible approach, right? So that's a tough question, I think, for the community to be faced with.
No, thank you for your responses. That's it.
Thank you. Councillor Jens?
Thank you. Sorry, I'm a new councillor. I'm just trying to figure this out here. Is there any opportunity for the developers or the home builders or the folks who built the Lewis Estates neighborhood or the Rosenthal neighborhood, for instance, to contribute to these sites? I'm just curious, was there an off-site levy, or was there something provided here when we built these neighborhoods?
So is your question to the speakers?
Oh, no, I apologize. I thought we were into general questions.
Not yet, no. So
Okay.
any questions?
Are the speakers aware of any opportunities for the developers who profited 30-40% off the neighborhoods to contribute to these facilities?
I don't know. I'm sure that's a question that council or administration has asked Melcor, and typically Melcor, who has been the predominant builder in the Lewis Farms area. But I'm not sure if any of them have been approached at this point. I think if the project is to move forward, that is something that could be looked at, but it's been one of these things that's been hanging over the West End for nearly 20 years. So
Actually, I think I have something to add to this. In our last conversation with Melcor, they do still own and operate the golf course throughout Lewis Estates, but they've since changed their operating model. They don't actually build anything anymore. They are primarily developers. So I'm not sure that would be a question to kind of follow up on, but that's my understanding of their operations.
May I follow up a question to the guests? Yeah. I certainly hear your frustration, and in my previous life, I was chair of the Edmonton Public School Board and had the opportunity to open schools over in the West End. And one of the frustrations we heard from residents all the time in new neighborhoods is the neighborhood was built, the homes went up for sale, the realtors put up big billboards that said "school this way, school's coming here," and yet, you know, it would take sometimes decades or more to, or some still haven't received the school that the plan was once promised. So it seems that the collective city are in a situation where we're caught constantly behind managing expectations. Like today we're talking about the development here, but there's going to be even more in other communities and other corridors and sections. And I would be interested in hearing a little bit more from you about your experience or the community's experience about how do we as a city kind of going forward manage expectations, and what can we learn from this journey that you've been on?
Kelly, did you want to add anything? I'm trying to think my words at the moment.
No, I don't think so. It's been a difficult conversation for the last decade, I suppose. I do know that there's a level of growing frustration in the West End that has to do with, you know, the spending that has gone on these facilities since 2008, and to see every other corner of the city serviced while those construction costs grow. And then, you know, when the focus turned to Lewis Farms, it just seemed like the whole rest of the city kind of piled on top of those construction costs. And I don't think it was, you know, the demand of the community to have one of the most expensive projects to undertake. So, you know, I think at this point the community just wants something. But I mean, it's taken us 15 years to get to this point. So that's where the frustration lies, really.
Yeah, and I think to add to your comment, Councillor Jans, yeah, most developments you come, you know that the school, you know, there's a school site, it may or may not get built based on government funding. Lewis Farms has always, like, the plan for the Lewis Farms Rec Center, based on my knowledge of the West End and living here for almost, well, 45 years, the original location, there was a proposed location for the Lewis Farms Rec Center prior to Lewis Farms, and it was over in Collingwood. And you know, during the 90s, when they stopped funding a lot of things, that project just went by the wayside, and it never went past, you know, the original proposal. And now we've got, you know, we've spent $30 million on planning for this, and it's just now sitting there. And again, as Kelly said, the city is being underserviced in the West End. Well, the rest of the city gets these facilities to support recreation needs for children and adults.
To clarify,
sorry, time's up, Councillor Jansen.
Thank you.
Apologies. Yep. Councillor Hamilton?
Thank you. I'll be relatively quick, mostly because I think I've encountered both these speakers or their community leagues, you know, at many points in this. So thank you, first of all, for coming once again and speaking to an issue that's important to West Edmonton. Something that I believe you mentioned, Kelly, and sorry to be informal about it, but you mentioned that you go over to Terwilliger. Is that correct? Or was that you, Mr. Andrews?
Yeah, no, I certainly use the ice surfaces in Terwilliger. The pool is another story. The capacity at Terwilliger is uncomfortable to bear, and I think it's because the majority of West Enders have to. That's, you know, that's one of the other facilities that we tend to lean on. So, you know, a West End facility would certainly ease the burden that Terwilliger is experiencing.
And I guess my follow-up question to that was going to be, how many of your neighbors and friends who live around you both rely on Terwilliger? Because I know, you know, I love the Jamie Platts YMCA, but it also has capacity issues at this point. They've already undergone an expansion. But anecdotally, how many people around you are going over to Terwilliger?
To be honest, like I said, you know, swimming isn't really part of our day to day because of how difficult it is to get into any pool. You know, our community swims have been suspended for a while, and so yeah, like we're actually seeing it impact our lifestyle and our ability to engage in some of those physical activities, and instead we choose hockey, because at least we have River Cree and Enoch and some non-city owned rinks that we can leverage.
Fair enough. And so I'll leave my questions there. I know we're getting tight on time, but I'd like to just thank you again for coming out and speaking to this issue and something that's really important to the West End. Thanks.
Thank you. That's it for questions for each of you, Mr. Andrews and Mr. Cromwell. I'd just say that about 20 years ago, I was sitting right where you're sitting in support of the Terwillegar Rec Center. So I really get it and really admire your tenacity and your dedication to your community. So thanks for joining us today. Really appreciate your insights and your comments. We'll now move to questions of administration. And we will start with Councillor Knack as the home councillor, as it were.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for the presentation. A few questions today. Setting aside money for a second, which I know sounds really odd, but just I want to double check. If money weren't an issue, is there anything stopping us from starting the first phase of that work as you've identified in that report? Is that the only barrier right now at this stage?
No, I'm not aware of anything that would prevent us. The design is, as I said, 100% complete. The tender packages have been all prepared. We have a construction manager on board and ready to go once we're prepared to release trade packages and stuff like that.
Again, I recognize ignoring money is not necessarily bad, but that I just wanted to make sure that was our big piece still.
Just want to be clear on when you say phasing as we've recommended?
Yes, as you've recommended. So phase one, which would talk about the district park sites.
Jason
sure.
can add to this.
Sure, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Sorry, I thought you meant the entire project, but yeah, if we were to go apart and phase it, there is a little bit of work to kind of decouple some of these pieces. Okay. And like a good example is, you know, for instance, in the example we provided in the report is if we were to proceed with the base level park development, trying to understand and rationalize the amount of scope that would be included in that. We have a good feeling that it would include the sports fields, some of the passive recreation activities, but would we need all of the parking lots? Maybe not.
For
Do we
sure.
need all of the servicing, the underground servicing? Do we need water and gas? Maybe not. Would we have to build the operations and maintenance facility to support maybe as it's currently designed? So there is a bit of work that we would have to do to kind of decouple that and break it apart.
Okay. How long do you think that would take, just out of curiosity? That's
Our hope, as envisioned in the report, would be that over the course of the next 12 months, we would undertake that work and then have it prepared for the 23 to 26 capital budget.
So you need that amount of time to decouple those two things.
Yeah, and we haven't given it a lot of thought, but you know, perhaps one of the things, if council directed us to, we might want to explore doing some additional public engagement specifically on that to say, if we were to split it up into different phases, what would we want to prioritize and include in phase one versus phase 2 or 3?
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, I guess my question I'm trying to figure out, because you know the last thing I'd want is to start decoupling and then during next year's budget deliberations, and I mean I don't want to presume anything. There's a lot. There's financial constraints in this, but along with coronation, which while not within the ward I represent, is right across the street from the ward I represent. And so it's also one, those two are essentially the next two priorities. So if we were going to be funding something, those would be the next two in line. And they're both at the stage where they are shovel ready now, correct?
That's correct. They're essentially the same sport.
So I guess what I want to figure out is it worth us starting that phase, you know, breaking out that phasing of the work or creating a unfunded capital profile for that first phase of work if in the end we're going to just advance those a year from now anyways. There's essentially wasted time and effort of your team if there's a chance that we could just advance it a year from now when we do the four-year budget.
Yeah, we're at a point now and there's some logic behind why we try to make some of these decisions at checkpoint 3. Mm-hmm. But because now we've advanced to checkpoint 4, some of that kind of shifting in priorities and changes in direction, there's cost implications to that, and kind of breaking apart the trade packages, the detailed design and tender work. Yeah, you lose some of the efficiencies for sure by decoupling it.
Okay.
But in terms of the ability to phase, if there was direction provided, then it becomes a lot quicker. and we can be more deliberate in terms of how that is actioned. So noting some of the comments from the speakers that there's been a desire for something, we recommended this as an option because you can advance it, and it does consider some of the economic pressures that we have at the city, in that it's not the whole project.
I guess my question I'm trying to figure out is the right next step here, because if there is a potential that council might consider funding the full project next year, is there anything worth doing over the next year that gets us ready for that conversation either way? Because we still have to have that district park site, regardless of whether we end up funding the construction of the main facility. There needs to be a district park site there. There needs to be the maintenance facility there, as we saw in a presentation a while ago.
So direction to advance phasing, either now or at council. I think this is a recommendation that council would have to approve, would put us in a position where we would be ready for the 23 to 26 with either option.
Okay.
Either a phased option or the entire package.
That's helpful. I'm out of time. I might need to come back. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Councillor Hamilton. She's got an engagement at 3:30, and then we'll take our break. Councillor Hamilton.
Thank you. I'm gonna try and be quick about it. But I think, Mr. Laughlin, you've outlined sort of the table stakes on this, and I'd like you to go into a little bit more of that. This is about the recommendation in the report, and please forgive me because the report came to us late, so I didn't have as much time to review it as I would have liked. But the table stakes are giving us options to proceed, and your best advice is that right now, all of the partnerships we've talked about do not amount to a substantial cost savings in the construction, design, and operation of a rec center, which is sorely needed for West Edmonton, correct?
That's correct. The EOI didn't result in a silver bullet.
And that does not preclude further conversations around operations later on, but that the funding for operations and the lack of stability in that space, not just on our part, but on other government, like other levels of government, mean that we can't go ahead assuming that that funding will be in place at this time.
That's correct.
All right. Something that comes up time and again is that, if we had let's call it out of the box construction, that the design of Lewis Farms and the cost to construct it would be much less. In your experience, is that something that holds true, or would we have to dive deeper into the entire program of events and sort of completely redesign? Or I'll leave it there. Would we have to dive more deeply into the program provided at this site?
On the basis of how far this project has advanced, if there was a significant reduction in the program, we would need to redesign.
Which would negate a lot of the savings you would get in eliminating or compromising on program, correct?
That's correct. And we provided a report previously, I can't remember the date, but that essentially outlined that.
Yeah, so this is, again, your best advice in terms of proceeding. And I think that there was something about offsite levies mentioned, and that's a good suggestion, but we're kind of past the horses out of the barn in this respect, correct? We can't recoup money on offsite levies for this particular project.
That's correct. And and I think Ms. McCabe is on the call, under the current work, I think the only thing that we've contemplated in offsite levies is, I'll leave it to Ms. McCabe to answer that.
She doesn't, to her credit, she doesn't have to go into offsite levies today, but she can say a word on it if she would like to.
Hey, Councillor Hamilton, I can give a really quick update. What we've explored with industry right now is the offset levies for fire halls, which is being implemented as of January 1st. We're working on the growth management framework that'll look at all things related to what are the investment tools that are needed for city plan, as well as potentially other offsite levies. And that'll be coming forward to Urban Planning Committee in 2022. One of the challenges when we started to look at offsite levies for recreation centers is something similar to what one of the speakers was commenting on, is that it's really challenging to define the benefiting area, which is an important part of offsite levies. The other quick thing I would just say here is that you can only collect offsite levies at the time of development permit and or subdivision. And so for this facility that's currently underway, if it was to be contemplated, the ability to collect for the entire facility would be very challenging based on the amount of development already in the area.
Great, thank you. And then one last question. I think Mr. Smythe is likely in the room. What proportion of visitors to Terwilliger Farms come from the Lewis Farms catchment area? We discussed it at a committee a while ago, but it's always shocking to me to hear the number.
Councillor Roger Jevney is here as well, so I'll pass over to Roger.
Hey, Councillor, I don't have that number off the top of my head. We could certainly go back to our 2019 data, sort of pre-pandemic, and look at our membership use and emissions use to see how many come from the Lewis Farms area, but it would be significant. We know it is the major facility that's closest by, and we do get a lot of use from the area.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you. I recall it being around the 40% mark, but I'd be looking for an update on that if that is indeed still holding. So, all right, those are my questions. Thank you thank you to committee for letting me ask my question.
Thank you. That takes us to 3:30. We're scheduled for a 50-minute break. We can shorten that if you like, or be back at 3:45. 3:45. Okie doke. See you at 3:45 sharp. Thank you. Thank you. So we'll get started again. And I'll just do a roll call, just to ensure we have quorum for our committee. So starting with Councillor Wright.
Here.
Councillor Tang.
I'm here.
And Councillor Jans.
Here.
So we'll continue with questions then on item 6.5. We'll go next to Councillor Tang.
Okay, well, thank you so much for the presentation. Just pulling up my notes here. I'm curious about any of the conversations with Enoch First Nation, given the proximity. Does this kind of align with some of their rec needs?
Yeah, Councillor, we engaged with the Enoch First Nation all the way through the process, including on the design. They have their own needs. They would like to develop some similar facilities, but very much want to make sure they complement what we build and that they do use city facilities and city staff could use facilities on the reserve if they came to be. So it's a very cooperative planning process.
But not necessarily a shared facility that would meet both their needs and our needs on the west end.
It would still meet the needs of folks living on the reserve.
Okay, but they'll be they're two separate things.
Yeah, if we built this facility, they would not likely go forward and build a pool. They would look
Okay.
at other amenities that would complement both members of Enoch First Nation, but also other residents of the West End.
Okay. And also just on the academic center, I didn't really quite understand that piece. If the Catholic School Board has deemed it no longer a priority, why is it still part of our plan?
Part of the agreement that we struck with the Edmonton Catholic School District was that they would fund the design. So they've actually contributed $1 million towards the design, and we've carried that through as our agreement was struck. And it's only recently in the last year or so that they've had a bit of a change of heart and change in priorities. So,
Do we have a change of heart too?
well, and I think that's the previous report that Mr. Laughlin referred to in February. We did outline a couple different options for council to consider at that point in relation to that. And I think pending the decision around funding the actual facility, we'd really need to make a decision on kind of a go-forward plan for that space, either to redesign it out or to find another complementary use or a tenant to be able to use that space.
Or remove it.
Okay. Just coming back to this phasing program, the phased approach. I mean, I think all the challenges is really laid out. And I see that if you have to figure out which pieces to prioritize, you'll also have to go back to the engagement bit after having engaged the community 10 plus years.
Yeah, I think part of the difficulty is that it may not necessarily be about preference or priority of the community. It may come down to kind of technical considerations, and one of the challenges is you can't build a facility until you build the park first, and maybe there's different parts of the park that can be built in different or various stages, but then the facility itself is just so integrated. If you've been to Meadows or Clairview, you know they don't just bolt off and on. The mechanical systems, a lot of the operating equipment is basically tied into it, so it's not as simple as just kind of orphaning off a piece of it.
Right. My timer isn't working, actually, just FYI, clerks. So I'll just go with my last question. I think I'm struggling with this one as well. I didn't think that we had the appetite for mega rec centers, and I know this has been on the books for many years, and there's a huge hole on the west end. Can you tell me, are we keeping with the mega center approach moving forward? Are we really, has this project really made us rethink our rec center approach? Yeah.
Yeah, Councillor, I think we go back to some of our policy documents where we still would like to see multipurpose rec centers, but probably to serve closer to 40 to 80,000 people. Where this Lewis Farms one, because of the delays and some other projects, there was a lot of pent-up demand. There were more amenities added. There were more needs. So it's going to serve a lot more than the district. It certainly has some citywide amenities in it. So going back to a more basic but still multipurpose rec center, I think is the direction that we would head.
The only other piece I would add, Councillor, is just the importance of the concept of a social heart and a meeting place. Keeping some little public dimension in a smaller scale multi-purpose rec center is still quite important.
Yeah, and after this one, then we've really covered, sort of that central hub idea kind of across the city, and maybe focus on the smaller infrastructure piece will be good.
That's correct.
Okay, that's good. Thank you so much.
Just to be clear, two, Coronation.
Oh, right, yes.
And Lewis Farms. Those were the last two from the original 2008 study.
Okay.
And then the most recent one that was identified was Rolling Miles, which is has been advanced to a certain level of design. I think it's approaching checkpoint 3, that is smaller scale.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Jans?
One thing I hear quite a bit out in the community is the idea that somehow we're gold plating infrastructure when we could be taking a more utilitarian approach. I mean, for example, if you told me that we were going to have two ball diamonds and like an equestrian, what's the equine? An equine center? I'm not comfortable in horse vernacular. If you had two ball diamonds and a show jumping event, I would say, well, that may not sound like the most utilitarian bang for your buck investment, but when I think of as well some of the concerns around, say, adding in the 10-meter platform and the diving facility, and I think of the many times I've gone to Kinsman and the 50-meter pool is chock-a-block LRT on the way to a FIFA qualifying game capacity, and then I see the dive pool a little more empty. And the dive pool, while I certainly appreciate the courage in the sport, I wonder about the bang for our collective buck about, say, the dive pool compared to additional soccer pitch or something else too. So I guess I'm wondering how in this phased approach could these difficult conversations, where I hear a shared will that we want to do something, but maybe some concern about exactly how to get maximal bang for our investment here.
So just want to be clear, when we talk about phasing, it's really two phases. It's the park development and it's the building. There really isn't a feasibility of the building, with the exception of the school component, which even then it does require some redesign. So it isn't really, we're not able to phase the building. It's more, the recommendation we have is the park advancing in advance of the building, or phased ahead of the building. As far as the dive tower and the longer pool, that was actually something that was not originally identified in the scope of the project, but through a report that went to committee, and I can't remember the year, it was suggested to be added as a backup to the Kinsman facility, and that was scope that council at the time directed us to include.
Okay. I had a question as well about, just to clarify, so we've spent about 30 million since, is that 2004?
Since the beginning of the schematic design or concept design all the way through to the tender checkpoint 4, so checkpoint 1 to checkpoint 4, 28 million. Of that amount, approximately 10 million of that is the land acquisition. So that's a sunk cost that we'll continue to benefit from for future.
Right. I think one of my concerns would be the argumentation, well, we're in for 30, we may as well be in for 380 or 313 or whatever the final number turns out to be. Like that to me is a concerning argumentation for council, and I wonder, I've seen a number of times where it seems to be we design fund, and that creates an expectation and a untenable situation for council, because we may have spent a few $1 million on land acquisition or design fund, but the cost of the enormous project, notwithstanding operating costs, deferred maintenance, replacement, all of these other pieces, we're really strapping future generations if we don't have don't have a sustainable model, which brought me to my previous line of questioning. Why was, we knew we were building these neighborhoods, we knew we were building this area, why didn't we have some sort of cost recovery or offsite levy or some form of revenue generation from the communities to pay for this infrastructure?
I'll see if Ms. McCabe can help with this, but I don't think that was a contemplation of previous councils related to levies associated with development. It is now, and as Ms. McCabe identified, early days, but pursuing the opportunity related to levies as it relates to fire stations to begin with.
Councillor Jans, Ms. McCabe, I don't remember the year that we got the ability to be able to levy for community or for rec centers and for fire halls, but it has been recent. We've been working with the development industry and fire halls was what's determined to go first. And through the growth management framework, we'll continue to explore other offsite levies as well as other incentives for achieving the goals in the city plan.
Thank you. Councillor Wright.
Hi, thank you. So just going through your different option analysis, I don't want to discount everything totally. I'm not really a fan of P3, but can you give me an example if we have used that in any of our rec facilities?
No, we haven't, and actually earlier in the project development, we did do a P3 analysis. City has an approved policy where projects greater than, I think it's 30 million, are required to go through some form of screening, and we did complete that, and upon completion of that evaluation, the screening didn't demonstrate a real strong discernible value or net benefit to the city or to the public. So we didn't see a value for money argument in being able to deliver the project in that way. So we reported it to council and we moved forward on the current path.
Okay, so I can throw that out then and feel good about it.
Other quick comment, Councillor, is when we were doing the planning for Terwilliger some years ago, we did do a very comprehensive P3 offer, and we're beginning to join forces with a private company. And then when we did the detailed analysis, benchmarking what the private partner was offering and what it would look like if it was funded from grants and tax levy and within municipal operations, the return on investment was less expensive if it was city delivered than if it was just purely a P3, as that in that particular case.
Okay. All right, thank you. And then I think you've clarified the phases through Councillor Jan's questions as well. How much savings would it be to do the academic center in a third phase?
So currently, the way it's been designed into the project, it's a roughly approximately $20 million worth of scope of work that the Catholic School District would be committed towards. To take the step of redesigning it out, we'd probably want to revisit some smaller details, like a component of the academic center includes the daycare. We might have to put back some of that. We have to do some redesign efforts. So our high-level estimates are that we would net out approximately $16 million of savings if we were to make a decision to take it out.
Okay. Okay, and no, I just want to let the two presidents of the community leagues know that I feel your pain, and I felt guilty as you were giving your presentations that the Meadows got theirs before you did. So, thank you.
Thank you. Just a few questions from me, if I can. So this project is at checkpoint 4, essentially shovel ready. Can't really be phased in terms of pieces of the building. It's site preparation, then land development, then building. Coronation is also essentially shovel ready at checkpoint 4, correct?
That's correct.
And essentially same situation there, can't be phased in terms of pieces of the building. It's kind of all or nothing for the building.
There is some smaller demolition components related to the Argyle Velodrome as well as the Coronation Arena, which might be, and then the Hemingway Pool, some of the aquatic facility upgrades could probably be, but those are very small in relation to the broader project.
Yeah, pennies on the dollar, essentially. Then, so further, first of all, do we have any other essentially shovel-ready recreation center projects, either twinning of existing facilities, adding a second sheet of ice, that kind of a thing, on any of the other facilities? You mentioned Rolly Miles has advanced a little. Yeah.
Yeah, and as Mr. Laughlin pointed out, that's in the planning and design phase. So it's not really kind of in that delivery-ready kind of state. So this is the only one that we have from a growth perspective.
Typically, we pay for these growth projects through debt, almost exclusively through debt.
They can.
I can just, sorry.
Go ahead.
I can just say that the major rec centers that we've built recently have been through debt.
So, and we don't foresee any grant programs coming to build mega rec centers. That would be the only other big source.
No, it would be a choice of council related to funding sources that are available. And then it would become a prioritization of those funding sources that are available if you're not considering debt. But what we've sort of deduced over the last few budget cycles, in order to renew the infrastructure that you have, you would be limiting that if you were to choose projects like this to use that funding over debt.
Yeah, okay. So I guess that's a capital program conversation around
Correct.
how much debt we have, how much capacity we have, what we use it for, all of those options.
Correct.
In terms of just discretely on the facility, the cost of the facility is to build it. And presuming debt, then there's an operating cost to pay back that debt over time. Then there's an operating cost to actually operate the building. So there may be some savings in delaying the opening or the operation of the building. So for instance, we could build the academic space just as a shell and not necessarily operate it beyond basic utilities. We could build the fitness center but not put the equipment in and hire the fitness assistants. Those are options, whether they amount to much.
The offset of that is you're doing it on the backs of providing a service to citizens, right? So it's that's the offset.
Yeah, what's the point? Yeah.
And revenue implications, Councillor.
Yeah, right, to actually offset.
Ability to sell memberships and drive admissions.
Yeah, fair enough. We talked a little, there was even here, but we've been talking about a fair bit over the last couple of years about the idea of those quadrant scale rec centers with 3, 4, 5 elements like this one versus the district level facility that might have 1 or 2 major components. What does our recreation master plan look like now? Like, does it emphasize one versus the other?
I think it emphasizes more the district level. The little bit smaller scale. It may not have 1 or 2 elements, still a multi-purpose facility, so you still get that sense of a community hub, a significant lobby, social spaces, multi-purpose programming spaces, but not the mega, not the 4 or 6 sheets of ice, and they are geared towards the more community-based.
Because and I'm just working from memory, but if we look at the mega rec center list, we've got Coronation and Lewis that are shovel-ready. We've got, at least in my end of town anyway, we've got Glen Ridding and Heritage Valley that would be next in the queue of the great big rec centers. But if we shift our thinking in not just in matured and established communities, but in those new communities to that more district level, the $80 million center versus the $400 million center, we might have the capacity to do more of them. So will our recreation master plan or our recreation planning head in that direction, or do you need a motion to sort of push in that direction?
I don't think we need a motion. We certainly welcome one, because that is the intention, that we would go back to those more district level with a number of amenities, and they say have more of them to serve smaller catchment areas. Kind of keep in line that sort of 5-kilometer catchment area is a maximum, and serve the people within that radius.
Thank you. I'm out of time. I'll go to Councillor Knack.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Excellent questions. Yeah, I think that's a very important conversation for us to have. So what I've heard here is really there's 2 phases for this project, and 3 if you want to consider the site preparation. I mean, that's the first phase, truly. then it would be building the park and then building the building. But there's no opportunity to really restructure the building outside of maybe the academic center a little bit there is what I've heard.
That's correct.
Yeah. So I guess my question on the site preparation is going to be something that whether we go a phased approach or a full build-out approach, that's going to be for council to decide a year from now at the capital budget. What I'm curious about is that can the site preparation work start because and not impact either route that we go? Because it is ready. The site is there. We're at the stage. So I just want to get an understanding. Can that work happen now?
There's a high likelihood, just based on where we're at with our existing construction manager, that we would be able to expedite some work in 2022. Okay. It would be limited in scope to, like you said, early site works. It wouldn't be an amenity-focused kind of.
Understandable, yeah. But it would allow you to keep, because I'm making an assumption, hopefully fair, that we're going to decide one of those two options next year for sure. We're not going to do neither of them, most likely. Same with coronation. I would expect the same thing, that those two are going to be on the list next year to do something. Therefore, is it worth us advancing that first phase of work, site preparation, in a way that doesn't impact that outcome for the council to choose?
I think ultimately decisions on funding are made by council, but I think given that we've taken the step to acquire the land, we're now left with land holdings that are in not a great state of readiness.
It wouldn't follow our community standards bylaw right now, the land that we hold. To be very honest, and I actually say that out loud because it's truly land that is in violation of our own bylaws and is not contributing. So, okay, that's really helpful information. So the last question, what I would ask, and I'll look to the committee if there's an interest of seeing if we can at least have an unfunded capital profile created for our deliberations this year. So I spoke a bit earlier with the chair, but.
I'm happy to make that motion on your behalf, Councillor Nett.
Thank you. Then the only other question I want to ask about is, with the academic center, do you need any type of direction to engage the public school board, Francophone school board, others over the next year to help inform if that particular piece will be activated? Or is that something that you'll be doing?
We're already doing it right now. It's kind of left us in a pinch where we're having to kind of, very quickly come to some resolution on next steps, where we know that they're not interested in co-locating in the integrated facility and committing as part of the rec center. But we're still trying to confirm their broader long-term interest in the land and that site, whether or not it would be still on that site, but in a separate facility in the future. So we're currently going through that, not just with the Catholic School District, but the other folks that are a party of our joint use
Okay, so
agreements.
knowing that work is happening, I don't need to do anything other than that. It's something I'll work on with the community leagues as well, because I think there might be some potential, but there were some good questions around what you might do if you can't activate that space. So I think those are all my questions. Yes, that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I see a couple of other speakers pop up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask that the motion be put on the floor, Madam Clerk, and I will move that, and then we will be able to ask questions both about our discussion and about that motion. So the motion is as follows, that administration update the current capital profile for the Lewis Farms facility and park to advance site preparations for City Council to consider during the fall 2021 supplementary capital budget adjustment deliberations. Just by way of quick explanation, there is an unfunded capital profile regarding this project that sits on the books there, but with no money attached to it. So this would essentially update that to consider funding for that site preparation piece of that unfunded profile. I'll go to Councillor Principe.
My question was, you were discussing about possibly other school boards maybe being interested, but have we considered, I don't even know if this is possible, but have we considered even leasing it out to private industry?
Yeah, we haven't done a market casting in that regard, but that is one of the options that we presented either for civic use or some kind of other civic-like use. So if it's somebody, an extension of an agency or some group that provides some kind of a public service, similar to some of the tenants that use facilities like the Orange Hub. That could be one of the potentials that we would look at.
Thank you. Councillor Paquette.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We've raised this before, but I'm just wondering if we'd actually gotten any further thought on it. One of the, I think one of the missed opportunities with the Clairview Rec Center was not having some way to directly attach it to transit. So I'm just wondering if any thought has been put toward that as far as the Lewis Farm site and the maybe a spur, I suppose, but because I guess the terminus was probably too late to attach that to rec center.
From an LRT perspective, Councillor Paquette?
Pardon me?
Do you mean with LRT?
Yeah, yeah.
We haven't advanced that. We've looked at, or in responding to the questions that came from committee and council over the past years, we've identified transit bus connection to the terminus at Lewis Farms as the most appropriate method of providing that service.
Yeah. You know, I guess maybe it's just municipal envy. Taking a look at the library in Calgary's downtown, it just seems like logistically, I guess that would be tough, but conceptually, it would make the rec center a much easier sell if there was an actual, LRT connection. But I guess that's probably not feasible at this point. Just double checking.
It's very challenging. That's what I would say. Nothing's not feasible. I don't know if I used the right description
That's right.
there.
Nothing's impossible if you have funding.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. That's all my questions.
Thank you. I think Councillor Knack wants to speak to this motion. So are there any other questions before we go to Councillor Knack? Councillor Knack?
Thank you. Yeah, just to make sure, because I know this is probably the first time we've referenced unfunded service packages, so I thought I should just sort of talk it through. So to be very clear, this does not bind council for this year's budget deliberations to fund anything. All this does is it creates a profile that we could consider, and that I would plan to bring forward during the budget considerations for us to discuss. And this is just specific to the site preparation. So I just want to make sure everyone's aware of this. If you vote for this, which I hope you do, you are not bound to support anything come budget. It just allows us to potentially have that conversation at the budget deliberations. And I think I'll leave it there because I'll speak to it come budget time, recognizing our timelines on our agenda now. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Rutherford.
So my only question, and following up to your comments, Councillor Knack, would we need a separate motion then to do the same consideration for coronation? Because I would want to have that option available for both. So would that motion come forward too at this committee? Or would I put a notice of motion?
What I suggest is maybe a notice of motion that we can chat about offline, because doing it on the fly, and you may want to have a conversation with Mr. Malifsa and Mr. Laughlin about the differences in that site. It's a established site, not a new site.
So we are currently carrying a motion that was approved by council. I can't remember exactly when, directing us to come back with the fall SCBA. So we do have some information that will be coming forward as part of the SCBA. So I wouldn't necessarily
What
think
is SCA?
Sorry, the supplementary capital budget adjustment.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's first scheduled for this coming Monday. I think the report will be released this week. And
Reports this week, one round of questions, and then subsequent conversations.
I just don't want, as a new councillor, to have this motion on the floor, and then when we get to budget deliberations, be like, oh, well, coronation can't be on the table because we didn't make. So that's what I'm just cautious of. Like, if it's all going to be there and they're both equally on the table for discussion, I recognize they're different projects, they're different sites, there's lots to consider there, but I don't want to not have that option on the table for budget deliberation if we're talking Lewis Farms as well.
Just to add to Mr. Malifsa's comment, the motion from council that is part of the upcoming budget discussion provides you options related to coronation. So your ability to adjust some in this vein will be there at budget.
So just to clarify, for my ease of mind, it's already in that discussion. It's already part of that package, so it does not need a motion to be further discussed.
No, I think you can make that motion as part of that budget discussion. That's what
Okay.
there's enough of an opportunity to discuss coronation as part of the report that provides you that opportunity.
Okay, get it. I understand. Thank you so much. Just wanted to double check.
Thank you. Councillor Jans.
I'm guessing though that there would be some costs associated with advanced site preparations and updating the current capital profile. So as much as my distinguished colleague is saying that this is not obliging us to invest anything in future, it does require some monetary work now, staff time, etc. So my concern would be that this does continue to add to that $30 million spend, and that there, if I'm reading this correctly, that this does, supporting this motion today would in fact, there is a monetary and staff commitment and others to this. So I would need to understand more, but I'd be reticent to support the motion. I would rather have all of this out together at the budget debate.
So the effort to prepare this is minor in relation to the work that's currently underway on the project. As there is an active profile, the component that is unfunded is the site preparations. Our effort to prepare what that would cost is small in comparison to the actual work. So it can be managed within the existing budget that's been allocated for this project.
So if I understand this correctly, this motion would allocate funding to do the site preparation. I imagine that no?
Just to develop the budget number that council could then debate in as part of the fall SCBA, supplementary capital budget adjustment.
So this motion here gives direction to administration to prepare a motion that would be saying this is what the scope would cost for site prep, etc. This is not funding site prep now.
Correct.
Okay. So no dirt's moving if we vote in favor today.
No, this is clear direction to administration to along the lines of phasing, to bring what phasing would look like to prepare the site.
Okay, well then I think you earned one more vote for the motion then. Thank you.
Councillor Wright.
I'm sorry, I did forget to ask this other question. So we're calling this a multi-purpose facility, but I really only see a pool and ice rinks. And I'm just wondering, like for the outdoor area, there's I think 3 baseball diamonds. Has one of them maybe been considered to be changed to a cricket pitch? I don't know what the appetite in the area is for that, or even an indoor soccer field to replace some of the hockey rinks. Has any, because I know the process started, 17 years ago? Has the appetite changed in the community?
We haven't received anything specifically over the last probably 12 to 24 months that would indicate inconsistency with support of the program as it's included to date. That said, if you do hear feedback, if there is something that you'd like us to be able to take under advisement, we're more than happy to do that. But I think for now we're kind of moving forward on the basis that the scope or the program is essentially locked in, pending some different direction from council.
I mean, that's some of the feedback I've gotten from my southeast area, and I don't know, maybe the community leagues have, I don't know if they've done any sort of recent engagement or if they want to.
Councilor, I can add to that. We certainly identified the need in 2004, but there was no program defined at that time. The program work has been relatively recent, and it does include gymnasiums, fitness center, multipurpose rooms, a fixtureless field in behind the facility. So then there's no fixtures on it, so it would be usable for a number of sports, not just with a fixed soccer post or backstops. Tennis courts, outdoor basketball, outdoor skating. So there are a number of indoor and outdoor amenities that were really defined through an exhaustive community process.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I see no other speakers, so I'm going to call for the vote then on this motion.
So moved.
I actually moved it
Oh,
already.
sorry, okay.
Yeah.
And you
It's
don't need a
just-
second?
Yeah,
Okay.
just need, no, don't need seconders
There's
at
a
committee.
pause.
So just need a vote amongst committee members.
We have all the votes.
Please display the vote. And that is carried 4-0, so we'll speak about this again at budget. Madam Clerk, there is a recommendation first of all. Does the motion just passed cover that recommendation?
I believe it does, yes.
In essence, okay. Then I have a subsequent motion I'd like to make with respect to the Recreation Master Plan that I share with you in the chat, if we could get that up. This is relatively simple, but just building on the conversation that we've just had. My motion is that administration prepare a report outlining an updated recreation center master plan that employs greater emphasis on district-level recreation centers. So just very quickly speaking to it, recreation centers that would, rather than have the several components that this rec center has. So, and I'm going from memory on this, but our master plan speaks to sort of anchor pieces. So Lewis Farms, for instance, has a pool, a rec center, an arena, a library, so 4 big anchor pieces. Whereas a center like Rolly Miles would have only 2, a pool and a fitness center. So this motion would essentially instruct administration to refine, develop, augment, adjust our recreation center master plan to focus more on those kinds of things, which would not necessarily preclude, but de-emphasize the mega quadrant style 5-element recreation centers. And again, it's my feeling that once we have that in front of us, we can maybe distribute the investment across the city more equitably, over time, and bring some of the things to some of the neighborhoods that don't have them or need renewal in an easier way. Again, that sort of, and I'm just picking numbers, but that $70 to $80 million investment versus that $400 million investment. Councillor Stevenson?
Yeah, just a quick speak quickly to the motion. I think that's a great idea, and I wonder if we might even add in district and local level recreation centers to potentially consider, the single sheet ice rinks that exist as well.
That's friendly. There's always will be a debate about the economics of those things, but that's friendly to me if we want to make that amendment. So it would be employs great emphasis on district and local level recreation centers. I believe, Mr. Jevney can correct me, but I believe local speaks to things like community centers, community halls, outdoor rinks, that kind of level. Am I right in that?
Yeah, more the neighborhood-based, and these facilities, although some traditionally or historically were built on neighborhood parks. But I think the motion, I think we understand the intent of it. And in a site like Oliver, where we have the old outdoor pool and the outdoor rink, combining them into some kind of new, modern, multi-purpose center on that same park site, I think is certainly consistent with the motion.
As an example, I think the other example you and I discussed, Mr. Jevney, was that it might be a pool that's added to the new community center down at Dr. Ann Anderson School, which would be, not the mega rec center, but between what is there and a pool would be, a 2-element rec center near 2 high schools ultimately. So that kind of thinking. Any other questions or comments? Not seeing any, then I'll call the vote.
We have all the votes.
Please display the vote. And that is carried 4-0. That completes item 6.5. We've got 35 minutes left before our day ends and 2 items. I believe that 6.4 requires a decision, so that could be requisitioned up to council without any discussion here, or we could talk about it and
So
then
moved.
requisition it. Just a second. The other item is 7.1, the sidewalk repairs, and I don't know that there's any urgency to that. However, we do have a speaker. So if we were to postpone that to the next committee meeting, we would want to potentially make that time specific so that that speaker could better plan their day. So I would suggest that, moving postponing item 7.1 to the next Community and Public Services Committee meeting, time specific at 9:30. So I'll make that motion. Any questions? Concerns, comments, discussion? Maybe we just get that up on the screen. Sorry, Christine, I'm making you
It's on its
fly.
way.
So the essence of that is that the sidewalk, item 7.1, sidewalk repairs and accessibility issues will be time-specific at 9:30 at the next CPSC meeting, which will be mid-January. Okay, calling the vote on that, please vote.
We have all the votes.
Please display the vote. Whoops, wrong screen, and that is carried. Thank you. We'll then move to item 6.4, Edmonton Arts Council Service Agreement. Presentation on this, Mr. Smythe?
We just have a very short verbal presentation.
Please go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm here this afternoon with Sanjay Sahani. Sanjay is the Executive Director of the Edmonton Arts Council. I'm not here, he's online. And for questions, we also have online Stephanie McCabe, Marco Hoffner from Legal Services, and Jody Graham from Finance. So today we are seeking approval of a new legal services agreement with the Edmonton Arts Council, as the previous 5-year service agreement expires at the end of this year. City of Edmonton and the Arts Council have had a 20-plus year relationship focused on supporting and promoting the arts community in Edmonton. The Arts Council is a civic agency, as I'm sure Council knows, receiving annual funding approved by Council, with councillors appointed to its Board of Directors. Staff across various departments do work hand in hand with the Arts Council on everything from artist-in-residence programs to animating neighborhoods and public spaces to commissioning and caring for public art. Agreement supports our continued collaboration to implement the city plan and our arts and culture plan called Connections and Exchanges, a 10-year plan to transform arts and heritage in Edmonton, 2019 to 2029. Sanjay will share more information on Connections and Exchanges in a moment. In terms of the city plan, arts and heritage play a critical role in city building. We do know that storytelling and celebrating unique cultures and heritage help people feel like they belong and can thrive in our community. Integrating public art into our open spaces and public facilities showcases Edmonton as a creative and innovative city. This new legal agreement embodies the city's relationship-based approach, reflects shared goals and outcomes, shared investment of both fiscal and non-fiscal resources, and shared accountability for results. Roles and responsibilities for both the parties that I've mentioned are detailed in focus areas such as investments, public art, programming, partnership development, measurement and evaluation, advocacy, and project management. And administration is also pleased that we've incorporated a land acknowledgement into the agreement, recognizing that the work we do today and in the future to build an artistic and culturally vibrant city is built upon the honored traditions and practices of Indigenous and Métis people. So I'll just quickly pass it over to Sanjay to say a few words, and then we can go to questions. Over to Sanjay.
Thank you, Rob, and good afternoon, Councillor Cartmel and actually all of City Council, not just members of this committee. I'm happy to be here. I'm not going to add very much more than what Rob has said. There's only a couple of things I'd like to say is that the previous council approved Connections and Exchanges in 2018, at the end of 2018, and they also renewed confidence in the Edmonton Arts Council as one of the leading agencies to implement this plan. I have to say that there is also the Edmonton Heritage Council, as well as Arts Habitat Edmonton, who are the other two partners in the implementation of Connections and Exchanges. I would like to add that the alignment of Connections and Exchanges as a city's cultural plan, right from the beginning when we were tasked with building this plan, we were very mindful that City Council and the City of Edmonton was working on its own strategy and the big city plan. So we've aligned connections and exchanges with those city building efforts. And then finally, I would like to say that the agreement with the city that we've had for 20 plus years has evolved over time. And as Rob pointed out, it's less of a fee for service agreement and more of a partnership now, as we work alongside our city colleagues to build a stronger and a healthier and more vibrant arts community in our city. So thank you for giving me a couple of minutes to talk about this, and I'm happy to answer questions with Rob. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shahani, and thank you for hanging in there all day for this discussion. Appreciate your time. We'll go now to questions. I only see Councillor Stevenson. I just want to check with committee that there's no one else, just to making sure that Councillor Stevenson's superpowers are not preempting anybody else. So. Councillor Wright.
Sorry, I didn't want you to get the first word in. So. I'm just wondering, it talks about operational funding, but I don't see anywhere in here for a dollar amount.
Council, I'll let Sanjay weigh in, but in the actual agreement, we don't put a dollar amount. That will be addressed in the budget process.
Okay.
So that's where that goes. Sanjay, do you have anything to add?
No, thank you. That's good.
Okay. And then I'm just wondering, so how much has it been in the past 5 years of the contract?
The numbers I have in this year, 2021, the funding provided was almost 15.7 million.
Okay. And that's just the current year that you've got available?
That's correct.
Okay.
Do you want another year, or?
No, I was just wondering sort of on average what it's been. So that's what you got? That's what you got?
No, next year that increases to 17.8.
Okay.
But council will formally approve that amount during the budget process later this year.
Okay.
Rob, I can add a little bit to that. 2019, it was 13.7. 2020 was 14.9. 2021 is 15.7, and the budget coming up will be 17.8 that will have to be approved by council during budget deliberations.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks, Jody. Okay, thank you, Councillor Jans.
Yeah, thank you. Just wanted to acknowledge the fantastic work that you and your team and your predecessors have done in the community, and absolutely just thrilled to read the report and read the material that you shipped over to our offices. And I apologize if I missed this in the reading, but do you have, when asked, sort of an easy return on investment figure that's been calculated? For every dollar invested in the arts in Edmonton, we've seen a blank return on investment. Or, one of the things I always go to is supporting local artists and investing in our community and the return on investment from festivals and these other pieces. But if you had some easy peer-reviewed or other metrics that we could use to justify continued investment during these very challenging economic times, and also to maybe shame other orders of government who haven't sufficiently invested, that would be very favorable.
So thank you, Councillor Jens. When we submitted our budget request to City Council at the 4-year operating budget cycle at the end of November in 2018, we did use an economic return of sort of investment. There is obviously the artistic and cultural and social return, but I'm just going to talk about the economic return. There was a study done, I think it was 2016, 2017 by PACE. At the time, the total output of the sector to Edmonton was valued at $105 million. This did not, of course, take into account many of the commercial businesses that are actually within what you would call cultural industries. So at the time, council's investment in the Edmonton Arts Council was roughly 12.5 million, between 12.5 and 13 million. So going by that, I think you can say that the return on investment was, for every dollar invested, it was around $8.5, gained. With this current plan, with connections and exchanges, we're of course broadening out how we calculate, return on investment. And this plan actually quite deliberately has a sort of measurement, evaluation, and learning framework, which is integrated into the strategy itself. And so we've been busy building out those indicators to measure progress, and we're going to be measuring quantitatively, obviously, but we're also very interested in the qualitative, aspects of what happens when a community has a rich and vibrant, artistic and cultural scene. And so what happens at an individual level, what happens at a community level, and then what happens at a more broader sort of neighborhood level, where arts organizations, festivals, and individual artists sort of make up this very diverse ecology that we are very lucky to have in our city. Don't know whether I answered all your question, but we are working very hard to bring all of that to you at the 2022 budget deliberations in November, December 2022.
That's fantastic. The more, obviously, arts are what brought me to Edmonton, kept me in Edmonton, and I know I'm not alone here. But hearing what you've shared and how my colleagues and I, as we talk about economic recovery in the region and helping people, the more we can talk about this is one of the investments that, as the city makes it builds genuine wealth in our neighborhoods and in our city. I think that's a really, really powerful sell. So certainly whatever we can do as councillors to help champion the message, and how, we hear from Edmonton Global and many of these other folks, and we've all been out championing the FIFA bid. Well, certainly, however, we can work with you to equally champion other sectors like yourself, notwithstanding all the other very valid meaning making that comes and makes life worth living. But certainly, for some of the naysayers, the more we can hear, that will really help as we go into a very, very difficult budget time.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Tang.
Thank you so much for the brief presentation. One of the feedback I've often heard from the community during COVID in particular is how much, because of the support they've gotten from the Arts Council, that they were able to survive. So I am very curious if you can just elaborate a little bit, how did you adapt your budget under these conditions? For example, diverting from reserves or from public events are now canceled due to COVID towards, say, artist fees. And I'm wondering how might the continued impact or effect of COVID manifest in our, not only the service agreement, but for the budget?
Thank you, Councillor Tang. So I'll answer the first question. The Edmonton Arts Council board and Edmonton Arts Council staff were already in a process of implementing connections and exchanges, and we had started a process to ensure that organizations in our community, this includes arts organizations and festivals, we had started a process of consultation with them, and quite sort of fortuitously, we had actually sent out operating investments by the end of February, early March, and then of course COVID struck. What that did was that it allowed us to then think about the individual artist who suddenly lost all employment, as you've just mentioned, and we were able to pivot quite quickly. And we changed our programs quite quickly and put the focus on artistic practice, because there was very little opportunity to do any kind of public presentation with the exception of digital presentation. So we moved our support to supporting artists continue the work and not feel completely dispirited and move out of Edmonton, but we continued to focus on the individual artist right throughout 2020. And I'd be happy to say that our granting programs have now actually become very focused on sort of ensuring that we're not just funding production presentation, but we're also funding creation, research and development, exploration, experimentation, all the things needed in order to hone your craft as an individual. And we continue to make innovations in how we support organizations, particularly in these relationships that arts organizations have with artists in the community. So it's been very much focused on ensuring that our arts ecology is healthy, vibrant, and recovers. Now, in terms of recovery, just briefly, there is lots of data that has come out across the country which shows that the arts sector was hit very badly and will probably be the last one to recover. And the Edmonton Arts Council, just to give you a sense of how concerned we are about the recovery, we have commissioned, along with Calgary Arts Development and the two community foundations in Calgary and Edmonton, we've commissioned a series of surveys to gauge public perception on whether people will actually come back and be willing to go into a theater just because of what has happened with COVID. And what we have found through these surveys is that a large majority of people are willing to go, but there's a very large chunk of people who are sitting on the fence. I mean, as the pandemic plays itself out and cases rise and fall, that affects people's desire to be in a closed space. So we're sort of monitoring that. We're offering support to arts organizations, and we'll continue doing that. But from a recovery standpoint, we do need to make sure that there is enough investment in the community itself.
Excellent, thank you. And Mr. Smythe, do you have anything to add?
I think Sanjay's covered it. I think we're good.
Great, thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Stevenson.
Yes, thank you so much for the presentation, and I so enjoyed reading through Connections and Exchanges. It's a phenomenal piece of work, and for me, really helped make concrete the value of arts and heritage in our city. So thank you for that. You know, I was also very impressed at the focus on how Indigenous peoples are brought into the conversation, and the work that was done in terms of the outreach and consultation, and the statement around supporting Indigenous autonomy. Where I struggle a little bit, though, is I wasn't sure how the plan and how the funding is supporting that autonomy. So it seems to me that it's still a process of Indigenous artists and groups needing to apply through the Edmonton Arts Council and other partners. So just wondering what the approach was there and how we more fully support that autonomy that's spoken about in the plan.
Thank you for that question. So we have a broad implementation principle that came directly from the consultations, and all three organizations are now held to account through that principle. We have done the actual work with Indigenous communities. We do it in a few ways. So the board of directors of at the Edmonton Arts Council has an Indigenous advisory committee, which advises the board on everything from allocations to programs and so on. From an operational standpoint, we have been doing sort of consultations which are specific to Indigenous artists, led by an Indigenous facilitator. And we've done those in 2020. We've also done some, I believe, this year. And the idea behind that is to get a qualitative sense of how artists feel supported. We were also able to hire, after the last budget cycle in 2018, with the new funds that Council gave us, we were able to hire an Indigenous relations advisor who is now on our staff full time, and she works across with all my teams. The commitment to Indigenous cultural autonomy really is predicated on a couple of principles, right? It's predicated on the idea that whatever programs, services, or projects that we do, whether it's in public art or it's in grant programs, we will follow, and we have followed, and we will follow, a method of collaboration and co-creation as much as possible. We don't want to assume that we know what Indigenous artists and Indigenous organizations need, but given the experience of the EAC over time, and one of the flagship projects that sort of Edmontonians are quite proud of, and which was recently featured in an international publication, which follows that kind of approach, is the Indigenous Art Park. And so we worked, over a 5-year period to make that a reality. So, I don't have a process answer, which is step 1, step 2, step 3, but just to let you know that this is an ongoing thing, and we are learning as the Edmonton Arts Council. We don't presume we know everything. We're learning as we go along from the wisdom of Indigenous artists and the Indigenous community as a whole. We also have board representation from the Indigenous community, and we've had that for at least a decade. Can we do more than we're doing? Absolutely. It's a little bit complicated with COVID because we can't gather. I mean, I'm joining you online today. I would have loved to be in chambers, but I'm not.
Yes.
And so it complicates things.
Yes, yeah, no, thank you so much for that response, and I understand it is an evolution over time, but maybe Mr. Smythe, if you could speak to any other initiatives. Again, what I hear, and not to take away from the work that you're doing, because it is exceptional and it's moving things forward, but again, it seems to be more that Indigenous individuals are playing advisory roles rather than actually having that autonomy and leadership opportunities. So just wondering, within the broader Indigenous framework, if there's conversation about a more autonomous structure.
Councillor, the point I would just add is just the connection between the Arts Council and our Indigenous Relations Office. So, I mean, that is raising stronger connections between those two pieces, and then really trying to link in the city plan with connections and exchanges, how those strategic pieces really get embedded with each other. And certainly, I think Sanjay's point is to amplify it, moving away from a fee-for-service kind of relationship to a stronger partnership. And I think the wheels are certainly in motion and have been for a bit. The service agreement formalizes that. The notion or concept of spinning off another organization has not been looked at in any way, shape, or form at this point. We believe, at this point in time at least, that the current governance structures are reasonable, and obviously within that we have to begin to move the dial more creatively so that there is some autonomy within that realm, the Indigenous art direction, if you will. But from a governance perspective, another organization isn't being contemplated at this point in time.
Okay, thanks for that clarity.
Thank you. Councillor Rice.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much for your presentation. And I do appreciate Edmonton Art Council's great work contributed to the enjoyment or quality of life and in the city. So I only have one question, and then I noticed this agreement is for the 5 years term. And so in terms of the funding, and then I heard every year we increase the funding. So my question is about is there any specific funding formula, and then to explain why we increase the funding every year, and also the funding formula is a fixed amount, and also we revisit every year, and because I noticed the funding is annual based, is not 5 years based.
Maybe I'll start off and then Sanjay can jump in. So when we worked on the 4-year budget for 19 to 22, the Arts Council brought the strategic plan, and lined up with the plan was the budget proposals for council to consider. So were very specific proposals that were put forward by the Arts Council to move the dial in our city. The previous council then supported the 4-year funding strategy. I should note, just for this council's information, that because we did some significant belt tightening last year, the Arts Council did step up and took a 1-year reduction of the growth of their budget. So that was really very much supported by administration and appreciated. So basically, the budget proposals were part of the plan for the Arts Council to move forward. So looking forward to so there are 22 budget requirements will be in front of council in the next few weeks, and then just like the rest of the civic administration, agencies, boards, and commissions will also prepare a four-year budget, and they'll present that to council during the latter part of 2022. So that will be a work in progress that they will move forward on. Sanjay, do you want to jump in some more, Sanjay?
No, I think that covers it. I mean, we will be before you at the 2023-26 budget deliberations, I believe, which will be in December of 22.
Okay. Okay. So is there any specific reason, and we can not just suggest the contract or agreement term and match the 4 years budgeting? Like planning process. And isn't, because right now this is 5 years, there is more than the 1 year. This agreement, I notice, is from like the January 1st, 2002 to December 31st, 2026. So that means it's 1 year more than the budgeting 4 years.
Just let me try to clarify. So the service agreement describes the relationship between the City of Edmonton and the Arts Council, and does not directly address the budget piece. The budget piece then, it's going to be recommended by the administration that the Arts Council budget for 2022 is part of the proposed budget, if you will. It isn't a service package or anything like that. It's part of the recommended budget for council to approve. And then, as Sanjay said, the 4-year budget then will be worked on next year for the following 4 years. So we believe, I mean, this service agreement, I think, is really really elevating the relationship between the two organizations, which is really what the purpose of today is. And then the budget discussions happen in future weeks and months.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I think that's all of the questions. So the motion in front of us would be that committee recommend to council that this service agreement between the city and the Arts Council for annual amounts approved by council through the budget process, as outlined in attachment 2 of this report, be approved. I'm just trying to be simple, to simplify the language a little bit. And that the agreement be in the form and content acceptable to the city manager. So in other words, we're recommending the agreement, not the amounts. And if there's discomfort with that, we can move this to council without a recommendation, but if committee is comfortable, then we would move this recommended motion, which would firm up that recommendation.
I'm comfortable moving.
Moving that motion? Yeah. So I tell you what, do you mind just reading it in, just for the record?
So I move that the service agreement, you want me to read the whole thing?
Yeah.
Okay, so I move that the service agreement between the City of Edmonton and Edmonton Arts Council for annual amounts approved by City Council through the operating budget process as outlined in attachment 2 of the November 15th, 2021 Citizen Services Report be approved, and that the agreement be in form and content acceptable to the city manager.
Seconded.
Don't need seconds at committee, but I appreciate your enthusiasm. Any questions or comments or speaking to it? Then we'll call the vote.
In favor.
Oh, thank you, Councillor Jans. We have all the votes.
Please display the vote. That is carried 4-0. Thank you, Mr. Shahani, for joining us today. Really appreciate your insights and looking forward to the conversations further into the year. All the best.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Councillor Cartmell.
That completes all of our public reports. Responses to councillor inquiries, we've moved that. Notices of motion and motions without customary notice, I'm not aware of any. And that means we are adjourned. Great work, everybody. Have a great night.